Chapter 418. The question of, who am I, that the White Emperor demon corpse had once struggled with was actually not completely meaningless. At this moment, sitting in Jianghu Palace was Li Mu, the Thousand Illusions Venerable, and the Demon Emperor White Emperor. He had the memories of the Thousand Illusions Venerable and the White Emperor, knew all their secrets and knew everyone they knew. With this, he could flawlessly pretend that he had been possessed by the Thousand Illusions Venerable or the White Emperor. If he said he was the Corpse Sex Grand Elder, then he was the Corpse Sex Grand Elder. Compared to the Thousand Illusions Venerable being possessed, most people were more willing to believe that he had possessed someone else. Although the Corpse Sect was also one of the 10 demonic sects, they were not interested in anything other than tomb raiding and refining corpses. Li Mu and the Empress had worked hard to turn the Demon Emperor's cave into a paradise. The mountains were green, the water was green, and the flowers were fragrant. However, there were always 10 corpses that had been dead for 3,000 years. Every time Li Mu thought about it, he felt uncomfortable. Rather than letting them gather dust in the cave, it was better to send them to the corpse sect and let the corpse refiners help refine them. At the same time, it saved Li Mu a lot of manpower and resources. However, the premise of all this was to make them believe that Li Mu was the Thousand Illusions Venerable. It was not difficult to do this, but he did not want to expose his true identity. The art of transformation was a mystical power that only level 6 cultivators were qualified to learn. Even if Li Mu used the false appearance talisman, he could not guarantee that there would be no flaws. He closed his eyes and searched in his mind. When he opened his eyes again, his face changed. Soon he had become a stranger. This was not a Taoist mystical power but a demon technique. The false appearance mystical power was an illusory technique that was cast with spells. If it met someone with a high cultivation, they would be seen through at a glance. On the other hand, this demon technique that had been lost with the fall of the White Emperor could change one's appearance without leaving a trace. Of course, demon techniques had their advantages, but Taoist techniques also had their limitations. The Tao sect's divine ability allowed one to transform into any appearance they wished with the help of Dharma spells. Regardless of whether it was a person's face, a rock, a wooden stake, a cow, or a dog, there was nothing it could not do. Demonic arts were not so random. At most, they could change their appearance but not their figure. If they wanted to change into the appearance of anyone, they would need to cultivate to a high level. It seemed that Tao arts were stronger, but Tao arts were essentially illusions. All illusions had the risk of being seen through. As for this demonic technique, even though there were many limitations when it was executed, it would leave no traces behind after the transformation, making it difficult for others to notice. There was also the invisibility spell. The Taoist invisibility spell could hide one's body, clothes, weapons, magic treasures, all the accessories on one's body, and any external objects that the caster wanted to hide. They were both invisible, but demonic arts were not as magical. It could only hide the caster's body, hair, and skin. It did not include clothes or any other external objects. In other words, if he wanted to become invisible through demonic arts, he would have to strip naked from head to toe. This seemed to be a useless spell, but it was very difficult to completely hide one's aura and spiritual power. Once any spiritual power fluctuations were revealed, even if others couldn't see it with the naked eye, they would be able to perceive their existence. As for the invisibility spell, it was born from a certain lizard's innate divine ability. It didn't consume any spiritual power at all, so naturally, there would be no spiritual power fluctuations. Not only could it make people disappear out of thin air, but it could also integrate with any surrounding environment without any disharmony. Even a powerhouse of the upper realm wouldn't be able to discover it. Li Mu comprehended a lot of demonic arts from Baidi's memory, and he first learned these two practical ones. The art of disguise that would not be discovered by others allowed him to act with another identity without exposing himself. As for the invisibility spell, although the casting conditions were a bit awkward, in the face of a life and death crisis, or some incomparably critical moment, who would care about wearing clothes or not? Of course, with Li Mu's caution, he would not joke about his own safety without confirmation. The transformation spell would not be exposed. Li Mu had already confirmed this through the Empress. As for the other one, it was inconvenient for him to take the initiative to look for the Empress. Li Mu thought for a while and returned to his room. A moment later, Wan and Xiao Bai, who were sitting cross-legged on the bed, suddenly found that the door of their room was pushed open. Xiao Bai turned her head and took a look and said in surprise, "Why is the door open? Is it the wind?" Wan turned her head to look and quickly turned back and said, "It should be the wind, it's your turn. Whoever wins this game will sleep inside tonight." Li Mu walked out of Wan and Xiao Bai's room. It seemed that the demonic arts from 3,000 years ago were indeed something. Xiaobai couldn't see through it, but even Wan, who had a small success in her spiritual pupils, couldn't discover him after he was invisible. On the bed in the room, Xiaobai finished moving the chess pieces and inadvertently looked at Wan and asked in confusion, "What's wrong with you? Why is your color so red?" After coming out of their room, Li Mu's confidence increased a little. He was barefoot, and using the demonic arts that originated from the cat race, he walked silently. He walked to the entrance of Chang'e Palace and saw Shangguan Li, who was standing guard outside. He reached out and waved his hand in front of her eyes, but Shangguan Li didn't react at all. Even she couldn't discover him. Li Mu became bolder and walked into Chang'e Palace. The Empress was reading a book. At this moment, there was no one in the palace, and she was lying on the dragon throne in an even more languid posture than usual. The dragon throne was very big, almost half the size of a bed. The Empress's posture revealed her graceful figure even more. She usually wore a loose dragon robe which didn't reveal her figure. It was only at this moment that Li Mu realized that the Empress actually had such an impressive figure. He walked around the palace, and the Empress was still quietly reading her book as if she didn't discover anything. This meant that Li Mu could also hide his figure without leaving any traces in front of other 7th realm cultivators. He frantically tested the Empress a few more times at the edge of danger, but the Empress still didn't react. Li Mu's heart was completely at ease. Just as he was about to leave, the Empress suddenly put down the book in her hand. She skillfully formed a hand seal. Li Mu recognized this hand seal. It was the Mystic Light Technique's hand seal. Why did she use the Mystic Light Technique for no reason? Was she trying to spy on someone? At this moment, Li Mu was also somewhat curious. He looked up at the image displayed by the Mystic Light Technique and couldn't help but be stunned. The image was actually Chang'e Palace. Li Mu was confused. What was the Empress doing? Was she spying on herself? At the same time, Zhou Yi's face also showed confusion. As if realizing something, she looked in a certain direction corresponding to the Mystic Light Technique. At the end of her line of sight, the invisible Li Mu met the Empress's gaze, and his heart skipped a beat. Zhou Yi stood up and asked in confusion, "What kind of technique is this? Even I can't see through it. How did you do it?" Li Mu's awkward voice came from the void. "Your Majesty, it's not very convenient for me right now. I'll come back and explain later," Zhou Yi said. "What's not convenient about it? You dare to play this kind of trick in front of me? Hurry up and show yourself." With that, she waved her sleeves and a storm of magic power swept out. Li Mu instantly felt a chill all over his body. This demonic technique was naturally practical, but it couldn't resist too much external interference. It was more suitable for sneaking around. Once someone sensed it, they had to immediately use other countermeasures. Under this storm of magic power, he couldn't maintain his invisible state anymore. Although Li Mu escaped into the Demon Emperor's cave at the first moment, Zhou Yi still caught a glimpse of him before he fled in a panic. The scene that she tried so hard to forget once again appeared in her mind. Chang'e Palace. Mr. Mei walked in slowly and handed a letter to Zhou Yi. He said, "Your Majesty, this is what Li Mu asked me to give to your Majesty." Zhou Yi still hadn't recovered from the morning's events. Her gaze was a little absent-minded. She said, "Put it on the table." Mr. Mei shook his head and said strangely, "I don't know why he couldn't tell your Majesty face to face. He hurriedly handed this letter to me and left the palace." Zhou Yi suddenly raised her head and said nervously, "What, he left the palace?" She sensed and found that Li Mu's aura was indeed gone from the palace. However, Wan and Xiaobai were still there. This made her feel at ease. As long as they were still there, Li Mu wasn't running away. She opened the letter. There were only 2 short lines on it. "Your Majesty, I need to go to Yingzhou to deal with the 10 demonic corpses. Then I'll go back to Mount Baiyun to attend Senior Xianxia's disciple recruitment ceremony. I'll return to the divine capital in a few days. Li Mu." For some reason, Zhou Qiong heaved a sigh of relief after reading the letter. She was still worried. When Li Mu came to Chang'e Palace later, should she pretend that nothing happened? Or should she pretend to be furious and reprimand him, and then let it go easily? If she pretended that nothing happened, what would he think? Would he think that she was an unreserved woman? If she pretended to be angry and reprimanded him fiercely, she would regret it even more if she hurt his feelings and made him want to leave. Compared to these 2 choices, it was obviously better to separate temporarily. After some time, both of them would forget about this matter and pretend that nothing had happened. At the same time that Zhou Yi breathed a sigh of relief in Chang'e Palace, Li Mu also breathed a long sigh of relief outside the divine capital. Although running away was shameful, it was useful. Otherwise he really didn't know how to face the Empress. He didn't even know how to explain it. Although the Empress was already 30 years old, she was still a pure and innocent girl who hadn't seen the world. Li Mu was really worried that he would leave a psychological scar on her. He was even more worried that she would mistakenly think that he had some strange fetish. Suddenly, he didn't have the courage to step into Jianghu Palace. Rather than stay here and make things awkward for both of them, it was better to separate temporarily and let time wash away everything. He originally planned to find the corpse sect later and deal with the 10 demonic corpses. Now he had to bring it forward. At the Department of Offerings, the slovenly Taoist priest looked at Li Mu and frowned. What are you up to this time? Last time he followed Li Mu to the demonic emperor's cave. If he didn't come out, his talisman of divine fate would undoubtedly be gone. The slovenly Taoist priest only wanted to spend the year well, get the talisman of divine fate, and then continue to look for opportunities to break through. Li Mu, go to Yingzhou. The slovenly Taoist priest shook his head. No. That kind of place where even birds don't shit. What's the point of going to that, Li Mu? When we come back from Yingzhou, I'll give you the talisman of divine fate. The slovenly Taoist priest stood up and asked, when do we leave? Li Mu, now. Several days later in the hinterland of Yingzhou. The sky here was gray, and the air was filled with poisonous miasma. Two figures stepped through the air and floated above a valley. The location of the corpse sect was very secretive. Even the demonic Dao only knew that they were in Yingzhou, but they didn't know the exact location of the corpse sect. However, to Li Mu, who had the memories of the 1,000 illusions, coming to the corpse sect was like going home. It wasn't just like home, it was home. The slovenly Taoist priest asked, you really don't want me to go with you? Li Mu shook his head and said, no need. He dragged the slovenly Taoist priest along just in case. With his current strength, if he encountered an enemy at the peak of the 6th realm, it would be difficult for him to escape. With the slovenly Taoist priest around, unless they encountered a 7th realm, there wouldn't be any accidents. After the death of the 1,000 illusions venerable master, there were no more 6th realm cultivators in the corpse sect. Although there were many 5th realm cultivators with the demonic emperor's cave and the Dao Bell, Li Mu could deal with them no matter how many 5th realm cultivators there were. His face changed and soon, it was the face of a stranger. This person had a white face and was a young man. Li Mu had changed his appearance based on old Wang's. He left the slovenly Taoist priest and continued to fly forward for 10 miles, arriving in front of a mountain. Li Mu flew forward another 100 feet and suddenly, a few voices came from the mountain. Scram. This is not a place you can come to. I'll give you 10 breaths. If you don't scram, I'll extract your soul and refine your corpse. Li Mu's body floated in the air and he said calmly, how dare you? His voice was steady and powerful and it echoed throughout the mountain. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. One by one, figures flew out from the mountain. More than 10 figures floated in front of Li Mu, their faces filled with shock. These people were all 5th realm cultivators. Among the 10 demonic sects, the corpse sect's strength was only weaker than the sage sects. If the Grand Elder, the 1,000 Illusions Venerable Master, reached the 7th realm, he could suppress the 1,000 Illusions Venerable Master and make the corpse sect the #1 sect below the sage sect. Unfortunately, with the death of the 1,000 Illusions Venerable Master, the corpse sect was leaderless and became a demonic sect. A tall and thin man with a pale face like a corpse stared at Li Mu and asked, who are you? What business do you have in the corpse sect? Li Mu smiled and said, Qin Shi, we haven't seen each other for 3 years and you don't recognize me? Qin Shi's expression changed greatly. Although the person in front of him had a different appearance and voice, his expression, actions, and even subtle eyes were exactly the same as the god in his heart, the Grand Elder 1,000 Illusions. You're the Grand Elder. Qin Shi blurted out and then said flatly, no, this is impossible. The Grand Elder's soul lamp has been extinguished. He can't be alive. The 1,000 Illusions Venerable Master's soul lamp had been extinguished, which meant that his soul had died long ago. It was impossible for him to appear in front of everyone. The soul lamp and life talisman were connected to the soul. Li Mu couldn't deceive the Nether Saint and now he couldn't deceive these people. He didn't deny it and said indifferently, the 1,000 Illusions Venerable Master is indeed dead. The one standing in front of you now is my memory host. I have erased the memory of his original body. Now I am him and he is me. Hearing this, everyone in the soul sect was shocked. Erasing someone else's memory and replacing it with his own. How crazy was he to do such a thing? In this way, who was the identity of the person whose memory was erased? If he was himself, he only had the memory of another person. But if he was Thousand Illusions, he had nothing but Thousand Illusions memory. How could the corpse sect treat him as the Grand Elder? Qin Shi looked at Li Mu and said in a low voice, "What evidence do you have?" Li Mu said indifferently, "Qin Shi, how dare you talk to me like this? Have you forgotten who picked you up from the pile of corpses and taught you how to cultivate and refine corpses?" After saying this, he looked at another person and said, "Han Shirsen, what's with that look? Don't think that I don't know about you and the female corpse you refined. Sun Chi has already told everyone about it." Han Shirsan's face was red. Looking at the other person, he gritted his teeth and said, "Sun Chi, didn't you say you would keep it a secret for me?" Sun Chi looked embarrassed and said, "I accidentally let it slip." Li Mu continued, "Sun Chi, once when Han Shirsan wasn't around, you secretly did something indescribable with his female corpse. All these years I didn't tell anyone." Han Shirsan was furious. "What? Sun Chi, you bastard. I thought you were my brother, but you did something worse than a beast." Sun Chi retorted, "If I'm worse than a beast, then what are you?" Seeing that the two were about to fight over a spirit corpse, Qin Shi said in a low voice, "Shut up, we'll talk about this later." He looked at Li Mu. At this moment he didn't have any doubts about what Li Mu said. If he didn't have the head elder's memories, how could he find this place and know everything about the corpse sect? Even so, he still couldn't accept such a special existence. He looked at Li Mu and said, "You said it yourself, you're not the head elder. You only have the head elder's memories. The head elder of the corpse sect is already dead. Go back to where you came from." Li Mu sighed and said regretfully, "If that's the case, then the 10,000-year-old ancient corpses I found can only be refined slowly after I establish the new corpse sect. I wonder if the 2 level 8 ancient corpses can be refined into 2 spirit corpses." Hearing this, everyone in the corpse sect was shocked. "What? Level 8 ancient corpse? This is a supreme grade material. I wonder if it's a male or a female. If I can refine a spirit corpse in this lifetime, I can die without regrets," Li Mu said indifferently and turned to leave. In the next moment, an urgent voice came from behind him. "Hold on." Qin Shi looked at Li Mu with a burning gaze and asked, "Can you let us see those ancient corpses?" Li Mu waved his hand, and 10 demon corpses were placed neatly in front of everyone. Everyone looked at these demon corpses and after a short silence, they were completely shocked. "Oh my god, the corpse still has such a strong aura after being dead for so long. He must have been a level 8 powerhouse when he was alive. These 2 corpses are both level 8, and the remaining ones are no lower than level 7. Where did you find these supreme grade ancient corpses? My hands are starting to itch. I want one of these 2 level 8 ancient corpses." "Bullshit, that's mine." "Then let's see if you have the ability. Wanna fight?" Looking at the corpse sect disciples arguing endlessly, Li Mu waved his hand again, and the 10 demon corpses were recalled by him. He looked at the group of corpse sect disciples and said indifferently, "Have you seen enough?" The crowd's noise came to an abrupt end. Their gazes met and soon, everyone had a decision in their eyes. In the next moment, with Qin Shi in the lead, everyone cupped their fists and bowed at the same time, saying loudly, "All corpse sect disciples welcome the return of the head elder." Chapter 419. Greetings, Grand Elder. Greetings, Grand Elder. Dozens of corpse sect disciples stood on the mountain peak and bowed to Li Mu. Li Mu's gaze was indifferent as he said indifferently, "Your words have enlightened me. I'm not Qian Huan, I only obtained his memories. The corpse sect has nothing to do with me and you have nothing to do with me. From today onwards you are you and I am me. I have nothing to do with you." Blah. Hearing this, the dozens of corpse sect disciples directly knelt on the ground. "Grand Elder, you can't abandon us. The corpse sect can't do without the Grand Elder. You've obtained the Grand Elder's inheritance, you're our Grand Elder. Please forgive our offense just now, Grand Elder." To the corpse sect disciples, it didn't matter whether the person in front of them was Qian Huan or not. It didn't matter whether he had obtained Qian Huan's memories. No matter who it was, to be able to give them 2 level 8 ancient corpses and 8 level 7 ancient corpses, he was the corpse sect's Grand Elder. Even if Grand Elder Qian Huan was still alive, he wouldn't be able to give them so much. As a corpse refiner, what could be more exciting than personally refining a spirit corpse? Not to mention, the person in front of them had Grand Elder Qian Huan's memories. He was more qualified than anyone to become the corpse sect's Grand Elder. Li Mu's expression eased as he said indifferently, "Stand up and speak." The purpose of his words just now was to establish his authority, not to draw a clear line between him and the corpse sect. If he left the corpse sect, where would he find the materials needed to refine corpses and these professional workers who didn't ask for anything in return? After subduing these people, Li Mu could rest assured and leave them to others. Seeing Li Mu's expression ease, the corpse sect disciples knew that the Grand Elder had forgiven them. They all relaxed and started to get closer to Li Mu. Grand Elder's cultivation is profound. He'll rule the 10 continents for thousands of years. Under Grand Elder's leadership, the corpse sect will surpass the sacred sect sooner or later and become the leader of the 10 sects. Grand Elder, where did you find these ancient corpses? Li Mu raised his hand and the crowd stopped talking abruptly. He glanced at the crowd and said, "These 10 ancient corpses are the key to the rise of the corpse sect. No one is allowed to leak this information, not even the sage sect or the other sections. If anyone violates this rule, they will be severely punished." As his voice fell, an extremely powerful aura emanated from his body. This aura swept out, and the people of the corpse sect felt an extreme pressure from the bottom of their hearts. From the very beginning, everyone could feel that the person who called himself the Great Elder was not even at the 6th realm. This was also the reason why they were unwilling to acknowledge him. It was only because of the 10 precious ancient corpses that they temporarily compromised. At this moment, under this imposing aura, they felt as if they were seeing the Great Elder come back to life. There was no doubt that the new First Elder was also an absolute powerhouse. After recovering from his shock, Han 13 patted his chest and promised, "Rest assured, Great Elder. If anyone dares to leak this information, I, Han 13, will be the first to extract his soul and refine his corpse. We are members of the corpse sect in life, and we will die as corpses of the corpse sect. We will follow the orders of the Great Elder." Yes, Great Elder. Although Qian Huan was dead, his prestige in the hearts of the people of the corpse sect was extremely high. Li Mu only used a little trick and easily inherited his position in the corpse sect. The entire corpse sect of the demonic path was the inheritance that Qian Huan left to him. Li Mu took this as Qian Huan possessing Old Wang as compensation for hurting his feelings. Of course, he was also very clear that the reason why the attitude of the people of the corpse sect changed so much was because of the 10 corpses. To a certain extent, the disciples of the corpse sect were all artists. They treated refining corpses as art. It was their art that was not understood by the world. Li Mu released the 10 corpses once again. The people of the corpse sect looked at them, their faces flushed red and their breathing quickened. Li Mu looked at them and said, "I still have important matters to attend to and can't stay in the corpse sect. I will leave these corpses to you. I hope you won't disappoint me." Han 13 licked his lips and said, "Rest assured, Great Elder. With these corpses, the rise of our corpse sect is just around the corner." For the next 3 days, Li Mu stayed in the corpse sect. Refining ordinary corpses was very different from refining corpses of this level. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he personally guided the people of the corpse sect and set up the corpse refining formation. He also confirmed a few important steps with them before he left with peace of mind. These 10 corpses required a lot of materials to refine. It would completely exhaust the wealth of the corpse sect, but no one cared. If they ran out of materials, they could save them up again. Corpses of this level were rare. Long before he came to the Ying continent, Li Mu had used a secret technique to refine these corpses once. This refinement could ensure that no matter how strong they were after they were refined, they would not have their own independent consciousness and could be controlled by Li Mu. In this way, even if the disciples of the corpse sect had other ideas in the future, they would not be able to cause too much trouble. When they left the Ying continent, the sloppy Taoist priest looked at Li Mu with a strange expression and said, "Kid, you have guts. It has always been the demonic Tao who has ideas about others. You are the first one who dares to do this to them." Li Mu did not say anything. He waved his hand and a golden light flew out and was caught by the sloppy Taoist priest. The sloppy old Taoist priest glanced at him. "It's still early for a year." Li Mu said, "From now on, Senior is free." When he had tried to rope in the sloppy Taoist priest, it was only to intimidate the Department of Worship. Now the Department of Worship no longer needed his intimidation. Li Mu also did not need to force him to stay. The lifelong pursuit of an expert of this level was to find that glimmer of hope to transcend. If he stayed in the Department of Worship and became a pawn of the imperial court, it would be very difficult for him to find his own Tao. Back then, he had enlightened Li Mu and it was not something that could be repaid with a mere 800 coins. Take this heavenly secret talisman as a token of gratitude for his guidance. The sloppy Taoist priest held the heavenly secret talisman with a look of admiration and said, "If Talisman Daozi did not beat me to it, I would really want to take you as my disciple." Li Mu smiled and cupped his hands. "I wish Senior to step into the Transcendence Great Tao as soon as possible." The sloppy Taoist priest waved his hand and said, "I also wish you to enter the bridal chamber as soon as possible and become the mother of the world." He took a last look at Li Mu before his body turned into a stream of light and disappeared into the horizon. Li Mu floated in the void alone and sighed in his heart. He had already taken all the shortcuts in his cultivation. How could it be so easy to step into the Dongxian? As for dominating the world, it was even more impossible. The 10 continents and 3 islands were vast and boundless. Although everyone knew that the 7th realm was the peak, no one knew if there were 8th and 9th realms in some secret places. Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and stopped thinking about these things. He had to take one step at a time. Thinking about these things too early was not good for his cultivation. He identified the direction and flew towards the northwest. A few days later on Mount Baiyun. In the Taoist palace on the main peak, Xianxia said in surprise, "Junior brother, didn't you say that you would come in a few days? Why are you here so early?" Li Mu said, "I have nothing to do in the imperial court, so I came a few days earlier." The real reason was that he was hiding from the Empress. This time he had lost a lot of face in front of the Empress. He did not even bring Wanwan and Xiaobai and fled. He had to at least wait until the end of the apprenticeship ceremony and wait until the Empress had completely forgotten about that matter before he appeared in front of her. Xianxia smiled and said, "You came back just in time. Qing, just came out of seclusion yesterday." Li Qing's cultivation was originally at the 4th realm. In the past 2 months, under the cultivation of the Fulu school, her cultivation was already at the peak of the 4th realm. She was only 1 step away from the 5th realm. This small step did not rely on seclusion but on chance. Lu Hanyin and Yu Zhenzi were traveling outside. Li Mu held Li Qing's hand and strolled around Mount Baiyun. The two of them met up with Hanja and talked about the days when they were constables in Yangqiu County. Seeing Li Qing reminiscing, Li Mu suggested that the two of them go back to the county yamen to have a look. At Qingshen Peak, Hanja looked at the two of them leaving inside. He said, "Junior sister Li still benefited that guy in the end. So what if he's good-looking? Just because he's good-looking he can marry too." Junior sister Qin stood beside him and snorted softly. She said, "Are you still not giving up on senior sister Li?" Hanja shook his head and said, "How can that be? As early as 2 years ago when she rejected me I gave up on her. Besides, she and Li Mu are both my friends. How can I still have such feelings for her?" Junior sister Qin raised her eyebrows. "Really? Really?" Hanja let out a long sigh and said, "Junior sister Li is like a flower in the mirror, the moon in the water. Instead of pursuing these illusory things, it's better to cherish the person in front of you. Li Si told me this a long time ago. I actually only understood it now." Junior sister Qin pursed her lips and combed the hair in front of her forehead. She asked, You're finally enlightened?" Hanja rolled his eyes at her and said, "I'm not stupid." Junior sister Qin asked, "How do you plan to cherish the person in front of you?" Hanja suddenly looked at her with burning eyes. Junior sister Qin's face turned red. She clasped her hands together and looked down at her toes. Hanja said, "Junior sister Qin, I have something to say to you for a long time." "I don't know if you're willing to," Junior sister Qin said without hesitation. "I'm willing." Hanja said happily, "Then help me ask senior sister Zheng if she's willing to be my Dao companion." Junior sister Qin lowered her head. After a long silence, she raised her head and said with a smile, "Okay." She flew back to the mountain gate and came to the female disciple's residence. She knocked on a door. A female disciple opened the door and asked doubtfully, "Junior sister Qin, what's the matter?" Junior sister Qin looked at her and said, "Senior sister Zheng, senior brother Han asked me to pass on a message to you." The female disciple asked, "What message?" Junior martial sister Qin said, "He said that you have an oval face, no breasts, no buttocks, and you have a terrible temper. Whoever becomes your Dao companion will have 8 lifetimes of bad luck." 15 minutes later, Hanja, whose face was bruised and his clothes were full of holes, sat on the ground in a sorry state. He looked up at the sky and asked loudly, "Why? Why did you do this to me? Is it wrong to like someone?" Junior sister Qin used the spiritual liquid to help him heal the bruises on his face. She shook her head and said, "This is a good thing. It let you see senior sister Zheng's temper in advance. If you two become Dao companions in the future and she treats you like this every day, it will be too late for you to regret it." Xianxia thought carefully and nodded. You seem to be right. Junior sister Qin smiled and said, Of course. You're my only family in this world. How can I lie to you? Next time if you like any senior sister, tell me. I'll help you confess. Xianxia waved his hand and said, Forget it. I've thought it through. Women will only affect my cultivation speed. I'll cultivate wholeheartedly in the future. Junior sister Qin looked at him with a smile and said, Then I'll accompany you, Xianxia County. The county government. There were not many familiar faces in the place where Li Mu and Li Qing used to work together. In the former duty room, Constable Zhou looked at their tightly held hands and said with a smile, I knew it. I knew it. The cultivators in the government office had changed again and again. Most of the constables had changed. Only Constable Zhou remained the same. The county government office was still the same, but Li Mu and Li Qing were not the same as before. After chatting with Constable Zhou for a while, the two walked out of the county government office and walked on the street hand in hand. In 2 years, the noodle stall that Li Qing liked to eat the most no longer had the same taste as before. Some of the familiar shops along the street were more ostentatious. Some had changed their business because of poor management. Roast chicken, crispy outside and tender inside. Roast chicken only costs 10 copper coins. 20 copper coins for 3, 100 copper coins for 12. Walking on the street, Li Mu suddenly smelled a tempting fragrance. He and Li Qing looked at the corner of the street at the same time. Li Qing said in surprise, It's them? At the corner of the street, a middle-aged couple stood in front of a temporary stall and shouted loudly. The middle-aged couple was short and ugly. However, the roasted chicken they were selling had a tempting aroma that whetted one's appetite with just a sniff. Because of that, their business was very good. The customers in front of the stall had already formed a long line. In Li Mu's eyes, they were not a middle-aged couple but two weasels. After 2 years, Li Mu and Li Qing met the weasel couple again. There were many customers. Although the two monsters were in a hurry, their faces were full of joy. We don't have any more today. Please come again tomorrow. I'm really sorry. We'll definitely prepare a few more tomorrow. Sorry. Come here tomorrow to buy roast chicken. We'll give you a bowl of chicken soup for free. The weasel couple sold the last roast chicken and put away the stall. They had a happy expression on their faces. If they maintained this business, they would be able to buy a small house here in half a year at most. Suddenly, the weasel seemed to have sensed something and looked forward. A young man and woman were holding hands. They waved at them and then turned to leave. The weasel was stunned for a moment. Then joy appeared on his face. He subconsciously wanted to chase after them but was stopped by the woman beside him. The woman shook her head and said, Don't disturb them. The weasel looked forward again. If what he was looking at was a painting, then the two figures were the most beautiful colors in the painting. They were so beautiful that one could not bear to destroy them. The weasel took a step forward and retracted his steps. If it were not for them, the couple would have been destroyed in body and soul. The weasel couple knelt down and kowtowed a few times in the direction where the two figures disappeared, ignoring the surprised eyes of the passers-by on the street. Seeing the weasel couple's current appearance, Li Mu was very gratified. They had helped each other in difficult times and grew old together. These two demons had lived the life that Li Mu wanted. What he longed for was not status or power. It was enough for him to be able to do what he loved with the person he loved. He held Li Qing's hand tightly and took her into the flask space. The two stood by the lake. Li Mu looked at Li Qing, who was shocked by the scenery in front of her, and said softly, This is where we will live in the future. Li Qing came back to her senses after a long time. Li Mu took her to the row of lakeside houses and said, You can live in whichever one you like in the future. Li Qing thought for a moment and pointed to an exquisite small building with a flower garden in front of the courtyard. She said, I like this one. P.S. You can follow my WX public account, not Rong Xiaorong. I made a map of the world of Greizhou myself. It is not easy to find the Easter egg after it is posted. I will post it on the public account at the same time. The public account will also update the character designs and so on. It will be easier to find it in the future. Chapter 420. Li Mu looked at the exquisite building with a flower bed and was speechless for a moment. This building was built by the Empress for herself. Every beam, every piece of wood, and every blade of grass in the flower bed were all made by the Empress. If she came here in the future and saw that someone had taken over her home, Li Mu couldn't imagine how furious she would be. One was his superior who loved and protected him, the other was his beloved woman. Li Mu's heart was in a dilemma as to which side to lean towards. Angering the Empress wouldn't end well. No one knew this better than Li Mu. But Li Mu didn't want his beloved woman to be sad. Li Qing saw his strange expression and asked, "What's wrong? Is this building not okay?" Li Mu's throat moved. He shook his head and said, "It's not that it's not okay. It's just that I suddenly want to build a house with you. A house that we built with our own hands, a house that belongs to us. Every structure of the house will be designed by us. We can also open a small garden in front of the house and plant the flowers we like in the garden." Li Qing imagined the scene that Li Mu described. Her beautiful face showed that she was moved. Compared to this small building in front of her, being able to build a house of love with the person she loved was obviously more meaningful. She nodded her head and said, "Okay." Li Mu wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and said, "Let's go. Let's go prepare the materials to build the house." 3 days later, Mount Baiyun. There was still some time before the disciple recruitment ceremony. Li Qing once again entered seclusion. Xianxia had exchanged a top-grade medicinal pill from the Pill Cauldron sect, which could help her completely cross the last barrier between the divine ability and the creation realm. Li Mu also took advantage of his free time to cultivate in seclusion on Mount Baiyun. It was very difficult for his cultivation of Tao to improve in a short period of time. His cultivation of Buddhism had also reached a bottleneck. Li Mu put most of his energy into learning demonic arts. Every path of cultivation had its own strengths and weaknesses. The more one dabbled in, the more one would have their own strengths and fewer weaknesses. The various demonic techniques recorded in the demon race's heavenly book were extremely useful to Li Mu, and he began to think about the other heavenly books. Each of the 6 Taoist sects had a Tao page. It was very likely that the Buddhists had one as well. The demon race's heavenly book was in Li Mu's hands. The fox race's heavenly book was in the hands of the 10,000 Illusions Lord. The ghost Tao's heavenly book was nowhere to be found. The other heavenly books were also rarely found. Among the heavenly books, Li Mu came into contact with the other 5 sects of the Tao sect the easiest. However, even though the 6 sects were all part of the Tao sects, it was impossible for them to lend their sect's treasures to others to comprehend. Unless Li Mu hid his identity and became a core disciple of one of the sects, or participated in the various sects' disciple recruitment trials and obtained first place. None of these methods were realistic for Li Mu. Li Mu stopped thinking about these and continued to comprehend the demonic techniques. At a certain moment, a Fulu flew in from outside and landed in the courtyard. The Fulu flashed and Li Mu heard Xianxia's voice. "Junior brother, please make a trip to the main peak's Tao Palace." Xianxia must have called him for something. Li Mu left the small hut and quickly flew to the main peak. In the main peak's Tao Palace, other than Xianxia, there was also a woman. She looked to be in her 30s and her skin was delicate and tight. She was like a charming young married woman, but her cultivation was already at the 6th realm. Li Mu naturally wouldn't think that she was only in her 30s or 40s. This woman had the fragrance of elixirs. The people of the Danding sect had always paid attention to maintaining their appearance, and they didn't lack elixirs to retain their looks. This woman was also a first seat of the Danding sect, and her age wouldn't be much younger than Yuzhen. Li Mu walked into the Tao Palace and asked, "Senior brother, what's the matter?" Xianxia looked at the woman and introduced her to Li Mu. "This is fellow Taoist Xianxia of the Danding sect." Li Mu cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist Xianxia." Xianxia returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist Lingjizi." Xianxia said slowly, "To be honest, the only person in our sect who can refine the Tianji talisman is junior brother Lingjizi. This matter requires his approval." Although a trace of shock flashed through the depths of Xianxia's eyes, he didn't doubt Xianxia's words. He cupped his hands again and said to Li Mu, "Please, fellow Taoist Lingjizi." Li Mu was still confused and looked at Xianxia. Xianxia explained, "It's like this, a senior of the Danding sect." After listening to him, Li Mu understood why the Danding sect sent 2 first seats to Mount Baiyun. Other than congratulating Xianxia on finding a beloved disciple, they also had a request. A grand elder of the Danding sect was nearing the end of his life and hoped to ask for a Tianji talisman from the Fulu school to extend his lifespan by 10 more years. For Li Mu this wasn't a big deal. At most it would take more effort. However, even blood brothers had to settle accounts. In the cultivation world no one would ask for help like this. Li Mu looked at Xianxia and asked, "The materials for the Tianji talisman." Xianxia took the initiative and said, "The Danding sect will bear all the materials for the talisman." This was what they should bear. When Li Mu didn't know how to hint to her, Xianxia continued, "If the talisman is successful, we will also prepare a generous gift for the Fulu school. The one who had to bear the burden was Li Mu. He couldn't let Xianxia take advantage of him. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "Actually, I'm also interested in alchemy." Xianxia immediately said, "I can give you a book on alchemy. The book contains the insights of the seniors of my sect on alchemy." Li Mu said, "I heard that the Danding sect's Dao page contains the truth of alchemy." Xianxia understood what he meant. After a moment of silence he said, "I can't make the decision on my own. I need to ask the sect master." Xianxia walked out of the Dao palace and quickly returned. He said, "Senior sister has agreed. If the Qinji talisman is successful, we can let fellow Daoist Ling Jizi study our Dao page once." This result was within Li Mu's expectations. Although the Dao page was a precious treasure of each sect, it wasn't that they never showed it to others. The Fulu school would let the first place in the Talisman Dao trial to study the Dao page once. After they studied it, they could choose to join the sect or not. Li Mu chose to join while Zhou Zhong chose to leave. The other 5 sects also had the same rule. The 6 sects had been passed down for thousands of years. Countless seniors of the sects had studied the Dao page and passed it down while innovating. What made the 6 sects what they were today was not the Dao page, but the hard work of generations of seniors of the sections. Therefore, borrowing the Danding sect's Dao page to study was not a matter of principle for the Danding sect. After receiving the Danding sect's promise, Li Mu cracked his knuckles and stretched his muscles. He said to Xianxia, "Senior brother, we can begin?" Several days later, dark clouds gathered in the sky above White Cloud Mountain again, accompanied by a strong heavenly might. After experiencing it once, the elders and disciples of White Cloud Mountain were used to it. They already knew that the appearance of this kind of heavenly phenomenon on White Cloud Mountain meant the birth of a saint-level Fulu. Wasn't it normal for a saint-level Fulu to be born in the ancestral court of Fulu school? Soon the first seats flew towards the thunderclouds. Not long after, the thunderclouds dissipated and the sky returned to normal. In the Taoist palace on the main peak, Jinko handed the divine secret talisman to Xianxia. Xianxia carefully accepted it and cupped his hands. "Thank you, Taoist Xianxia, Taoist Ling Jizi." Then she stretched out her hand and a blank page appeared in her palm. Li Mu's cultivation was no longer the same as before. In addition, before he wrote the talisman, the Pill Cauldron sect had given him a lot of elixirs to recover his magic power and mind. At this moment he was in a good state. Li Mu took the page and sat down cross-legged. When his mind touched the page, it immediately sank into another space. What entered his eyes was a familiar fog. Li Mu did not delay. He closed his eyes and began to recite the Clear Heart mantra over and over again. He did not know how many times he recited it. When he opened his eyes, the fog in front of him had disappeared. In a desolate and broken world, there was scorched earth everywhere. Countless giant beasts were wreaking havoc on the ground. In the distance, countless figures stood in the air. Countless streams of light flew out from their hands. The streams of light streaked past Li Mu's eyes. He could vaguely see that there were round pills in the light. A pill flew into the middle of a few giant beasts and exploded. A black hole appeared at the spot where the pill exploded. The giant beasts were instantly sucked into the black hole and disappeared. A pill flew into the mouth of a giant beast. The giant beast roared and fell to the ground powerlessly. Soon it turned into stone. Some pills exploded, turning into flames that could not be extinguished. Some pills touched the giant beast and turned into blue ice. Li Mu had seen a similar scene in the Fulu school's Dao page. The difference was that those people could draw talismans in the air, but these humans used pills as weapons to attack these giant beasts. They would also throw some pills into their mouths. They seemed to be used to recover their spiritual power. A pill flew in from afar and passed through Li Mu's body. A piece of information suddenly appeared in Li Mu's mind. After realizing what this was, Li Mu reached out and grabbed another pill that flew in front of him. The pill passed through his palm and Li Mu grabbed nothing but air. However, a new piece of information appeared in his mind. The Pill Cauldron sect's Dao page was someone else's after all. There was only one chance to comprehend it. Li Mu flew into the crowd and touched the pills up close. Pieces of information about the Dao of alchemy flowed into Li Mu's mind. In the Dao palace, Xianxia instinctively sensed that something was wrong. He looked puzzled. Xianxia smiled and asked, "What's wrong, Taoist Xianxia?" Xianxia said, "Comprehending the Dao page requires a lot of mental energy. Taoist Ling Jizi's cultivation is not high, but he can persist for so long." Xianxia looked at him and said meaningfully, "Although my junior brother's cultivation is limited, his mental state is abnormally firm. Even I admire him." At a certain moment, Li Mu, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, suddenly opened his eyes. He stood up and returned the Tao page to Xianxia. He said, "Thank you." Xianxia put away the Tao page and asked, "How much did Taoist Ling Jizi comprehend?" Li Mu said humbly, "A little, a little." Chapter 421. With the experience of comprehending the Fulu Tao page last time, Li Mu had learned to keep a low profile. He had said that he was just going to take a look, but in the end, Li Mu had inherited everything that the Danding sect had inherited from the Tao page. What the Danding sect had not comprehended from the Tao page, Li Mu had also secretly learned. It was no exaggeration to say that the current him could already use his knowledge of alchemy to establish a second Danding sect. It was just that there was no need to do so. Hearing Li Mu say that he had only comprehended a little, Xianxia was finally relieved. After all, the Tao page was an item of the sect's inheritance. If it were not for the fact that they had a favor to ask of the Fulu school this time, they definitely would not have taken the Tao page out to trade. Xianxia put away the Tianji talisman and the Tao page and quickly left. Xianxia looked at Li Mu and asked, "Junior brother, how much have you comprehended from the Danding sect's inheritance?" Li Mu shrugged and said, "I can swear to the heavenly Tao that it really is only a little." Xianxia thought to himself that perhaps he was overthinking. It was already rare for him to have such talent in the Tao of Talismans and the Tao of Tao. Wanting him to also have such high attainments in alchemy was a bit too much. At this time, Li Mu looked at Xianxia with shining eyes and asked, "Senior brother, can you borrow the Tao pages of the other 4 sects to take a look?" Xianxia shook his head and said, "I'm afraid not. If it's just the Danding sect, we can still use your interest in alchemy as an excuse. If we use the same excuse for all the other sects, it would seem that we have ulterior motives." Xianxia's words made sense. The Fulu school had its own Tao page. If they wanted to take it for free, they obviously had bad intentions. The various Taoist sects might think that the Fulu school had the ambition of swallowing up the 5 sections. Although all the sects had this idea, thinking and doing were 2 different things. In the next few days, Li Mu began to digest the knowledge of alchemy he had obtained from the Tao page. Cultivators generally believed that the function of pills was to gather the essence of spiritual objects in the world. After consuming it, it could increase one's magic power and heal injuries. However, this understanding was obviously narrow. From what Li Mu had seen, the cultivators of ancient times mostly used pills as weapons. Just like the Fulu school's Fulu, they could greatly increase one's battle prowess. Unfortunately, the Dan Cauldron sect did not pass down those powerful pill treasures. The Pill Cauldron school was very sincere. After letting Li Mu comprehend the Tao page, they also gave him an alchemy book and an alchemy furnace. The book of alchemy was not precious. It was an entry-level book in the world of cultivation. The 6 Taoist sects were very generous. They did not forbid the circulation of some basic fu, pills and formations. Instead, they supported it. This was also the reason why the Taoist sects had grown so rapidly in the past few hundred years. Unlike the other sects, Taoism was more willing to share. Of course, the core secrets of the Taoist sects were only known to the upper echelons and core disciples. The alchemy book that the Pill Cauldron school gave Li Mu was only an entry-level book. What was truly precious was the annotations in the alchemy book. This would allow Li Mu to avoid many detours. After asking Xianxia for some spiritual herbs, Li Mu began to try refining pills. At first he failed a few furnaces. However, when he discovered that the art of tranquility could also be used to refine pills, his success rate greatly increased. Although writing talismans and refining pills were 2 different things, there were similarities. One required one to control the talisman's magic power, while the other required one to control the temperature of the flames. If one's mind wavered, the fu would be destroyed. Similarly, if one's magic power wavered, the flames would become unstable, and the pills in the cauldron would be destroyed. During this period, Li Mu used the materials given to him by Xianxia to practice on Mount Baiyun. After a few days, when he returned to the divine capital and joined forces with the Empress, he might have a chance to refine a saint-level pill. Half a month later, the Fulu school's headmaster Xianxia and Elder Yuzenzi's apprenticeship ceremony was held as scheduled. This was a rare occasion for the Fulu school in recent years. The other 5 sects of Taoism, the major subsects of the Fulu school, and some reputable sects in the cultivation world all sent people to Mount Baiyun to congratulate them. The names of Li Qing and Lu Hanyan were also known by the major sects in the cultivation world. As the direct disciples of the Fulu school's headmaster and great elder, their futures were limitless. It could even be said that the future of the Fulu school rested on their shoulders. In these few days the two girls received so many gifts that their hands went soft. Li Mu purposely built a few more rooms in the cave to store the gifts they received. Inside the cave, Lu Hanyan stood by the lake and sighed. "What a beautiful place," Li Mu said. "This will be our home from now on." Lu Hanyan looked at Li Mu and asked, "I heard little sister Qing say that the two of you personally built a small building here?" Li Mu immediately said, "At that time you were outside. I originally planned to build one here when you came back." Lu Hanyan waved her hand and said, "I'm too lazy to build one. The small buildings here are all good. I'll just pick one." As soon as she finished speaking, Li Mu's heart skipped a beat. He pretended not to care at all and said, "Then you can choose whatever you want." Lu Hanyan walked around the lake and sized up the small buildings. Li Mu walked to her side and suggested, "What do you think of this one? It's facing south and has the best feng shui." Lu Hanyan shook her head and said, "I don't like this one." Li Mu continued, "What about this one? The terrace outside is so good. You can usually play the zither on it." Lu Hanyan continued to shake her head and said, "It's mediocre and has no characteristics." When passing by another small building, Li Mu quickened his pace and glanced around. He thought to himself, "Please don't choose this one, please don't choose this one." Lu Hanyan stopped and pointed to an exquisite small building with a flower garden. She said, "This one." Li Mu stopped and said with a smile, "Actually, I think it's more meaningful for the two of us to build a love house with our own hands." Lu Hanyan said, "But I really like this small building. Look at how beautiful it is. It's like a palace and there's a small flower garden in front of it." Li Mu's throat moved. He said, "We can copy this small building and build an identical." Lu Hanyan asked, "Since we already have one, why do we have to build another one?" Li Mu said, "This is different. Don't you want to have a small building built by the two of us?" Lu Hanyan said indifferently, "No need to be so troublesome. There's no difference anyway." Li Mu looked at her and said helplessly, "Why are you so unromantic?" Lu Hanyan frowned and said, "Are you saying that I'm not as romantic as Sister Qing? As expected, when there's a new person you forget the old. Do you think that I can't compare to her in any way?" Li Mu hurriedly explained, "It's not like that. Actually it's..." Lu Hanyan asked angrily, "What is it?" "Actually, this small building belongs to Her Majesty the Empress." "Her Majesty the Empress? Why is Her Majesty the Empress small building in our house?" Yes. Why are you hesitating? Is it because... No wonder you ran to the palace when we were not at home and didn't even go home. No wonder Her Majesty is so good to you. No wonder the rumors say that you are Empress Li. It turns out that what they said is true." After deducing for a while, Li Mu shook his head and threw these thoughts out of his mind. He could never say that to Lu Hanyan, otherwise things would become more difficult to end. Lu Hanyan was still waiting for Li Mu's answer. She asked, "Why are you shaking your head? Why don't you let me choose this one?" Li Mu raised his head and explained, "Because Qing and I built this small building by ourselves. I'm worried that if you don't have it you will think that I'm biased." "I see." Lu Hanyan held Li Mu's hand and said, "Don't worry. I won't think too much. I don't want to be so troublesome." She held Li Mu's hand and walked into the small building. After looking around the small building, she was more satisfied. "It's so beautiful inside. This bed is so big. It's so comfortable to lie down. The tables and chairs here are also made of spiritual wood. The carvings on them are so exquisite. They must be the work of a famous artist. The paintings on the wall, are they the original works of Daoxian Jinren from the previous dynasty? Most of his paintings have been lost. Where did you find them? These two vases are also so beautiful. They must be expensive?" Li Mu stood in the room and squeezed out a smile. He said, "As long as you like it." Xianxia and Yuzhenzi's disciple recruitment ceremony ended. Li Mu stayed for a few more days before returning to Xindu. Lu Hanyan and Li Qing did not return. In the following days they would receive the true inheritance of Fulu school. This was the most important opportunity for them to enter the 6th realm and even the 7th realm. After returning to Xindu, Li Mu stayed at home for 2 days to make sufficient preparations before going to the palace. At the entrance of Chang'an Palace, he nervously asked Shangguanli, "Is Her Majesty here?" Shangguanli nodded and said, "Her Majesty is reading a book. You can go in by yourself." Li Mu walked into Chang'an Palace and saw the Empress reclining on the dragon throne. He said softly, "Your Majesty." The Empress's face was hidden behind the book. She said lightly, "Wait for me to finish reading this page." She read this page for a full quarter of an hour. Li Mu saw that she was holding the book upside down but did not dare to remind her. After a long time she put down the book and stood up. She asked, "What's the result of the trip to Yingzhou?" Li Mu said, "I have successfully gained the trust of Corpse Sect and had them refine the 10 demonic corpses for me." The Empress asked, "Aren't you afraid that they will use them against you after they refine them?" Li Mu explained, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. I have already used the spirit-splitting technique to deal with the 10 demonic corpses. No matter who refine them, they will only listen to my command." After that, the Empress asked him some questions about the apprenticeship ceremony. However, she didn't mention a single word about Li Mu's streaking in the Jianghu Palace. If she did not mention it, Li Mu would not take the initiative to mention it either. The two of them reached a tacit understanding about this matter. After the tacit understanding, the Empress said lightly, "Take me to your cave. I want to see my flower garden." Chapter 422. If Li Mu was really guilty, he was willing to accept the punishment of the Great Zhou Law, rather than face this kind of scene every day. The Empress's small building was occupied by Lu Hanyan. She slept on the Empress's bed and even picked the Empress's flowers. How was Li Mu going to explain this to the Empress? In Jianghu Palace, Zhou Yi saw that Li Mu was still standing in the same place and said, "Still not opening the door?" Li Mu let out a sigh. With a thought, he appeared in the cave. The Empress's figure also appeared by his side. Zhou Yi was just about to go to his own small building when he found that it was different from the last time he was here. There were two more small buildings by the lake. One was unique and elegant, the other was grand and imposing. The grand and imposing building looked like a smaller version of Jianghu Palace at first glance. It immediately attracted Zhou Yi's attention. Although it was called a small building, it was actually more like a palace. Carved railings, painted rafters and jade tiles flew. It was particularly conspicuous among the row of small buildings. There was a unique and luxurious air. There were flower beds on both sides of the front of the palace, and a winding path led to a secluded place. In the left flower bed there was a small pavilion. In the pavilion there were stone chairs and stone tables. In the right flower bed there was an ancient tree with a green shade. There was a swing hanging down. The swing was not a simple piece of wood, but an exquisite chair. The chair was carved with hollow patterns. At a glance, one could tell that a lot of effort had been put into it. At first glance, Zhou Yi fell in love with this building. Li Mu secretly glanced at the Empress's expression. He was slightly relieved. Striking while the iron was hot, he said, "Your Majesty, I built this for you." Zhou Yi was surprised. "For me?" Li Mu nodded. "Your Majesty's status is so noble. Only this small building can show Your Majesty's status. Your Majesty, please go inside and take a look." Zhou Yi's eyes revealed a satisfied expression. He nodded and said, "Then let's take a look." The two of them walked along the small path in the middle of the flower bed, and entered this 3-story building. Li Mu introduced everything to the Empress one by one. "This room is His Majesty's bedchamber. The bedchamber doesn't need to be too big, otherwise His Majesty won't be able to sleep well. This is a leisure area. In the future, Your Majesty can play chess or cards with Wanwan and Xiao Bai here. This is the kitchen. The area next to it is the dining area." After introducing the first floor, the two of them went to the second floor. The second floor was very spacious, with only a large hall. Li Mu continued, "Your Majesty can use this as a place for seclusion. There are soundproof talismans on all 4 walls as well as the upper and lower walls. If you cultivate here, you definitely won't be disturbed." Then the two of them went up to the 3rd floor. On the 3rd floor, Li Mu had built a swimming pool. At the front of the pool was a balcony that led outside the room. Li Mu said, "This is a place to take a bath. Before Your Majesty goes to bed at night, you can take a bath here. It will help you sleep. The balcony outside overlooks the lake. You can also lie there and watch the clouds." For this small building, Li Mu had put in a lot of effort. Standing on the balcony of the 3rd floor, he looked at the Empress and asked, "Is Your Majesty satisfied with this place?" Zhou Yi nodded and said, "Not bad. You are very considerate." Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and said, "As long as Your Majesty likes it." Zhou Yi continued, "Okay, now let's go to my small building and have a look." Li Mu's expression froze and he asked, That small building, does Your Majesty still want it?" Zhou Yi said, "That was built by me. Of course I want it." Li Mu wiped his forehead and said, I thought that with this place Your Majesty would not want that building, so I took the initiative to sleep there for one night. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." Zhou Yi rolled her eyes at him and asked, "You have your own place. Why did you sleep in my place?" Li Mu explained, "Your Majesty, it is because I like your Majesty's small building very much." Zhou Yi waved her hand and said, "Forget it. Since you like it, I will give it to you. I will go and see my flowers." Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, please." A moment later, in the flower bed in front of the small building, Zhou Yi frowned, pointed to a corner of the flower bed and asked, "There is a peony missing here. Who picked it?" She also noticed that a peony was missing. Li Mu said nervously, "I was careless." Zhou Yi looked at Li Mu, her brows gradually relaxed, but in the end she did not say anything. She walked out of the flower bed and said, "This small building and flower bed, I will give them to you. Take good care of the flower bed. There is a painting in the building that I want to take away. As for the rest, I will give them to you." She walked into the room and stretched out her hand. The painting on the wall floated down and automatically rolled up into her hand. Although Lu Hanyan also liked this painting, but in the future when she asked, Li Mu could say that the Empress lent it to him. In order to make it more believable, he turned to ask the Empress, "Your Majesty, what is the mystery of this painting?" Zhou Yi said, "This is the authentic work of the previous dynasty's master painter, Dao Xianxia. He entered the Dao through painting. In this painting there is his painting inheritance. Unfortunately, after the painting was cut off, no one could comprehend it." Li Mu remembered this reason. In the future when Lu Hanyan asked, he would say that the Empress lent it to him to comprehend the painting. Like Taoism and Buddhism, the school of painting was once a cultivation school. However, their lineage had been severed and they had completely disappeared. Until now, the successors of legalism, the school of the military, and Confucianism would occasionally appear, but there was no trace of the successor of the school of painting. Li Mu did not care about this. He had to take a closer look at this painting so that when he explained it to Lu Hanyan in the future, it would be more believable. Before the Empress put it away, Li Mu said, "Your Majesty, can you let me take a look at this painting?" Zhou Yi asked, "This painting has been hanging here for so long, have you not seen it?" Li Mu said, "I only gave it a few glances." Zhou Yi did not say anything else. He stretched out his hand, and the painting automatically flew up and unfolded once again. Li Mu looked at the painting scroll. This was the first time he looked at this painting carefully. This was actually an ink landscape painting. There were not many elements in the painting. Distant mountains, near water, a lone boat, and standing at the bow of the boat was an old man wearing a straw raincoat. Li Mu did not know much about painting. He could only tell that although this painting was simple, it gave people an extremely spacious and distant feeling. However, if he were to say that he comprehended anything from the painting, that was really not the slightest bit. No matter how he looked at it, it was just an ordinary and mediocre landscape painting. Generally speaking, when his heart was the most peaceful, his comprehension was the strongest. Li Mu habitually chanted the clear heart incantation. When he looked at the painting again, he could not help but be shocked. Usually when he was upset, he would chant the clear heart incantation to calm his heart and chi. However, this time, after he chanted the clear heart incantation, the painting in his eyes became distorted. With just a casual glance, Li Mu felt dazzled. Accompanying this was a wave of dizziness. The more he chanted the clear heart incantation, the more distorted the painting became. In the end he could only see balls of swirling ink. Li Mu felt that his soul was also swirling. In the next instant he appeared in a boundless world. Green mountains, clear water, and a lone boat. He stood at the stern of the boat. An old man wearing a straw raincoat stood at the bow of the boat with his back facing him. The old man held a paintbrush in his hand. When Li Mu looked over, the paintbrush moved. The old man held the paintbrush and his wrist moved quickly. It seemed that he was painting in the void. A ball of ink appeared in the air. It seemed to be a swimming fish. The old man's last stroke touched the fish's eye. The fish shook its tail and jumped into the water. The old man's paintbrush continued to move. After a while, a crane twisted its neck and let out a crisp cry. It flapped its wings and flew into the sky. The old man drew a mountain peak with a few strokes. The mountain peak flew into the distance and became a huge mountain peak. The huge mountain peak fell into the water and set off huge waves. It was as if it was going to capsize the small boat. The old man at the bow of the boat continued to draw. He drew a pair of wings. These wings appeared behind him. With two flaps, the old man's body left the boat and flew into the sky. A huge wave came and capsized the small boat. Li Mu fell into the water. In the next moment he appeared in the Empress's small house again. The painting floated quietly in the air. In the painting there was still a mountain far away near the water, a lone boat and an old man. Recalling the scene in the illusion, Li Mu was dumbfounded. With just a brush he could create something out of nothing. Was this the power of a painter? While Li Mu was shocked, Zhou Yi had already walked to the bedside. She turned around and asked Li Mu, "Have you slept here before?" Li Mu nodded and said, "Yes." Zhou Yi bent down and sniffed lightly. Her eyes narrowed and she said, "You are lying to me. This is not your smell." Li Mu opened his mouth and explained, "This?" Zhou Yi said coldly, "Think carefully before you speak. You should know what the punishment is for the crime of deceiving the Empress." Li Mu said helplessly, "In addition to me, my wife has also slept here." Zhou Yi sniffed again and indeed smelled the scents of two people. One was Lu Hanyan's and the other was Li Mu's. The two scents were mixed together. In other words, the two of them had occupied her house and slept in her bed. Perhaps Li Mu had even picked a flower from her garden and put it on another woman's head. Zhou Qiong found it hard to imagine what they had done on this bed. She closed her eyes and said, "You can go. I want to be alone for a while." Li Mu sighed. What should come finally came. He wanted to explain but he did not know what to say. In the end he could only cup his hands and say, "I will take my leave." As his voice fell, his figure disappeared in an instant. Zhou Yi walked out of the small building, walked to the lakeside and sat down with her hands on her knees. By the lakeside a few fish swam around carefreely. When two of the fish swam in front of her, they suddenly stopped and then began to peck each other. Zhou Yi was inexplicably angry. She picked up a stone and threw it into the water. Splash! The stone fell into the water and splashed. The two fish were startled and separated, swimming in different directions. Zhou Yi coldly snorted, "Who asked you to kiss again?" Chapter 423. When Li Mu left the cave he realized that it was his place. But the Empress took it, so be it. She was the Empress and he was the one who didn't care about morality. It was only right for him to take a step back. Li Mu had some thoughts about the painting, but he wasn't in the mood to think about it. The Empress wanted to be alone and Xiao Bai and Wan Wan were playing somewhere. He had nothing to do so he took a stroll on the street. Unknowingly he walked to the Shindu Yamen. Inside the Luoyang Yamen Wang Wu saw a familiar figure and stood up immediately. He asked in surprise and joy, "Sir Li, what brings you here?" Li Mu asked, "Is Li Si here?" Wang Wu nodded. "Yes, he's in the back office. I'll go inform him now." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Do what you need to do. I'll go find him myself." The Shindu Yamen was Li Si's territory now. Li Si was at the peak of his life. His career and family were both successful. No one would have thought that a small constable in Yangqiu County would have such a position in just 2 years. It was lunchtime. Li Mu picked a restaurant and drank a few cups with Li Si. After 3 rounds of wine, Li Si asked casually, "Where's the boss and Miss Hanyan?" Li Mu said, "They're at Mount Baiyun. They still have some important things to do." Li Mu wanted to drink to drown his sorrows, but the bitter wine made him even more sorrowful. He put down the cup and looked at Li Si again. "I want to ask you something on behalf of a friend." Li Si glanced at him and took a sip of wine. "Speak." Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "This friend of mine did something wrong and hurt another friend of his. He doesn't know how to ask for her forgiveness now." After listening to Li Mu's description, Li Si asked, "Your friend and your friend's friend are the two you mentioned last time, right?" Li Mu nodded. "That's right." Li Si said, "It's been so long. I thought they were already together. Why are they still friends?" Li Mu explained, "It's not the kind of relationship you think." Li Si asked, "If it's not that kind of relationship, would they be together every day and night and even live together?" Li Mu said, "It's because of work." Li Si took a sip of wine and said, "Can't you just end the working relationship as soon as possible? If this continues, won't they be annoyed?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "It's not what you think. My friend has a family." Li Si retorted, "When you had a family, weren't you also with the boss? Is that different?" "What's different? Is she married?" "Not really." "Then what are you afraid of? They're not like what you think. You're not him. How do you know?" Li Si thought for a moment and said, "How about this? From now on, if you're that friend of yours, imagine if that woman gets married. How would you feel?" Li Mu suddenly woke up. Imagine if the Empress had an Empress and concubines. How would he feel? Damn it, if he didn't think about it he wouldn't know. Now that he thought about it, Li Mu realized that he had such a strong desire to possess the Empress. Of course he didn't want to possess her body. He wanted to be loved by her. He didn't want to share the Empress's love with a second person. He didn't want a second person to be with her every day. He didn't want her to get hurt for a second person. She even sent her avatar and left the divine capital to save him. The Empress was so good to him, but he became arrogant and hurt the Empress. Thinking about it, it was too much. Li Mu stood up and said, "Drink by yourself. I'll leave first." After leaving the restaurant, Li Mu first used a sound transmission magic treasure to contact Lu Hanyin and Li Qing, who were far away in the North County. He told them which small building in the cave belonged to the Empress. As for the reason, he explained it very clearly. Becoming the Empress of the Great Zhou wasn't her intention. When the Emperor Qi in the ancestral temple condensed and the Great Zhou had a new emperor, she would retire. She would grow grass and flowers and become their neighbor as an ordinary woman. Different from Li Mu's deduction, Lu Hanyin didn't blame him and didn't make trouble for no reason. Instead, she asked Li Mu to apologize to the Empress on her behalf. This way, Li Mu only needed to obtain the Empress's forgiveness. He slowly sighed and walked toward the palace gate. Jianghu Palace. Zhou Yi sat on the dragon throne, but she wasn't in the mood to read. Mr. Mei saw that the Empress was unhappy. He stood quietly to the side and didn't say anything. Zhou Yi didn't say much. She snorted and asked, "Mei Wei, what's the punishment for deceiving the Empress according to the law?" Mr. Mei said softly, "Your Majesty, the punishment for deceiving the Empress is execution according to the law." She raised her head and said, "I don't know who is so bold. I'll have someone catch him and bring him back for questioning." Zhou Yi said angrily, She only said one word, then she was discouraged. She shook her head and said, "Forget it." Mr. Mei thought for a moment and asked, "Did Li Mu make your Majesty angry again?" Hearing someone mention it, Zhou Yi felt wronged again. She couldn't help but say, "He gave away the small building I built in my flower garden to others. He even lied to me. Don't you think I should punish him?" Mr. Mei was also angry after hearing this. He said, "You should. Your Majesty is so nice to him. This bastard dared to do this to your Majesty. I'll catch him and give him 100 beatings." Zhou Yi hesitated and said, "You don't have to punish him so severely, do you?" Mr. Mei said, "He should be taught a lesson." Zhou Yi sighed and said, "Forget it. I'm not related to him. It's normal for him to be nice to his wife." Mr. Mei was even more indignant. He said loudly, "Your Majesty is so nice to him. You dote on him and protect him. When the tributes from the counties arrived, he was the first one you thought of. This is how he repaid your Majesty. No, I can't take this lying down. If I don't teach him a lesson, I'll be ashamed of myself and your Majesty." At this time, Shangguanli walked in and said, "Your Majesty, Li Mu wants to see you." Lord Mei said coldly, "Let him wait outside for 2 hours before coming in." Zhou Yi hesitated. She was about to speak when she said firmly, "Your Majesty, you can't protect him this time." Zhou Yi thought for a while and nodded. She sat on the dragon throne with a hesitant expression. After a few minutes, she looked outside the hall and said, "Come in." Mr. Mei looked helpless, but he could only watch Li Mu walk into the hall. She looked at Li Mu fiercely and asked, "How dare you come here?" Li Mu ignored Mr. Mei and looked at the Empress. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I'm guilty." Zhou Yi looked surprised. She coughed and put on a dignified expression. She asked, "What are you guilty of?" Li Mu said sincerely, "I shouldn't have lied to your Majesty. I shouldn't have slept in your Majesty's pavilion without your Majesty's permission. Please punish me, your Majesty." Mr. Mei snorted and said, "The crime of lying to the Empress is punishable by death. Do you think a small punishment can make up for your crime?" Zhou Yi stood up from the dragon throne and said lightly, "It's good that you know you're wrong. Just don't do it again." Lord Mei stared blankly at the Empress with a blank expression. Li Mu bowed and said, "Thank you, your Majesty." Soon Li Mu, Shangguanli, and Mr. Mei walked out of the Jianghu Palace together. Li Mu turned to Mr. Mei as soon as he stepped out of the gate. He said with disappointment, "Sister Mei, I called you sister so many times. How could you treat me like this in front of Her Majesty? You disappoint me." Li Mu shook his head and left. Mr. Mei stood there for a long time. Then he turned to look at Shangguanli and said seriously, "I swear if I say another word I'll be a dog." Chapter 424. One should learn from one's mistakes. If one had to use countless lies to cover up a lie, it would be better to be honest from the beginning. After getting a new residence, the Empress generously gave the small building to Li Mu. This incident ended without any mishaps. However, Mr. May's behavior disappointed him. The two of them had such a deep friendship, but he actually fanned the flames in front of the Empress. Li Mu needed to reconsider their friendship. Li Mu was full of apologies to the Empress. The Empress was very good to him, and Li Mu seemed to be using her kindness to do whatever he wanted, ignoring her feelings. Even if he was favored, he couldn't be fearless. A relationship had to be maintained for a long time, and it had to be mutual. If he relied on her to do whatever he wanted, he would only end up with nothing. This was the conclusion that Li Mu had come to after observing countless relationships. Fortunately, the Empress was magnanimous and Lu Hanyan was tolerant. Baiyin Mountain. Main Peak. Li Qing looked at Lu Hanyan's melancholy expression and asked, "Sister, what's wrong?" Lu Hanyan sighed and said, "I'm a little regretful now." Li Qing asked, "What do you regret?" Lu Hanyan said, "How great would it have been if I had stayed with him in the North County?" The next day, outside Chang'e Palace, Mr. Mei and Shangguan Li stood outside the palace, occasionally glancing inside. Li Mu had walked into Chang'e Palace for 2 hours. He didn't know what he had to say to the Empress. They hadn't finished talking for 2 whole hours. Yesterday he wanted nothing more than to behead him. Today he was being lovey-dovey again. Mei Darren sighed. She had watched His Majesty grow up. She thought she understood His Majesty very well. However, she didn't know when it started, but she couldn't guess His Majesty's thoughts. In Chang'e Palace, Li Mu was actually playing aeroplane chess with the Empress. This was a game that Wan Wan and Xiaobai often played. They often used this game to decide who would sleep in Li Mu at night. The Empress was with them every day and she had also learned this new form of entertainment. Li Mu took the initiative to admit his mistake, and the Empress also forgave him. The relationship between monarch and subject returned to how it was before. At this time, Li Mu finally had the mood to talk to her about the painting. Zhou Yi threw the dice and asked, "Have you comprehended the mystery of that painting?" Li Mu nodded and described the scene he saw in the painting. Zhou Yi was silent for a moment and said slowly, "Reverend Daoxian indeed hid the art of painting in that painting. Thousands of years ago, when the 100 schools of thought were contending, the art of painting used the art of creating something from nothing, and it was also one of the best in the 100 schools of thought. However, after the death of Reverend Daoxian, the art of painting lost its inheritance. This is the only painting left behind by Reverend Daoxian. Later generations only guessed that perhaps the mystery of painting was hidden in this painting, but I didn't expect it to be true." Li Mu thought of those scenes and said with some shock, "With such a mysterious art of creating something from nothing, weren't the art cultivators back then invincible?" Zhou Yi shook her head and said, "In the path of cultivation, who dares to say that they are invincible? Legalism cultivators can say that they are the law, but they are not invincible in the world. Every path has its strengths and weaknesses, and there is no true invincibility. Although each path of cultivation has its strengths and weaknesses, but if one cultivates all paths, one can learn from the strong points to make up for the weak points, and might not be invincible." At this moment, Zhou Yi stretched out her hand, a white light flashed, and the painting appeared in her hand again. She handed the painting to Li Mu and said, "Since you can comprehend the inheritance of Reverend Daoxian, this painting is for you, and you can slowly comprehend it." Li Mu took the painting and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." An hour later, Li Mu walked out of the Chang'e Palace with the painting in his hand. "Stop." He had only taken 2 steps when Mr. May's voice came from behind him. Li Mu stopped, turned around and asked, "What's the matter?" Mr. May walked up and knocked on his head. "You're all grown up now and you don't even call me sister anymore." Li Mu glanced at her and asked, "Is there a sister who would risk her life to kill her brother?" Mr. May's face darkened and he said, "Don't mention this to me again." Li Mu was just saying Mr. May watched the Empress grow up, and he must be closer to her than Li Mu. Just based on this, not to mention her, even Li Mu himself felt sorry for the Empress. Mr. May glanced at him and saw the thing in his hand and said in shock, "Her Majesty actually gave this painting to you?" Li Mu looked at the painting in his hand and asked, "Is there a problem?" Mr. May's expression was complicated and he said, "Her Majesty liked painting when she was young, and she admired the painter Reverend Daoxian very much. This is the only authentic work of Reverend Daoxian, and also Her Majesty's favorite painting, and it was the betrothal gift that the late Emperor gave to the Zhou family." She was a little emotional and said, "Her Majesty actually gave her favorite thing to you." From the way the Empress purposely took this painting away from the small building, it was obvious that she really liked this painting, but she still gave it to him without hesitation. Li Mu was touched and the guilt in his heart deepened. He walked aimlessly to the Luoyang Yamen, and Li Si saw him and immediately said, Next time you treat me to a drink, pay the bill first. Li Mu waved his hand and said, this time I'm not here to treat you to a drink, I have a question to ask you. Li Si said indifferently, that friend of yours is in trouble again? Li Mu nodded and said, under what circumstances would a person give her favorite thing to you? Li Si glanced at him and said, if a person is willing to give her favorite thing to you, then that thing is not her favorite thing but you. Li Si looked at Li Mu and said word by word, you are her favorite thing. When Li Mu left the Luoyang Yamen he had a lot on his mind. Was it like Li Si said that he was the Empress' favorite thing? Li Mu was sure that the Empress liked him. In the eyes of others he was originally the Empress' favorite official. The Empress was his solid backing. He was in front of the Empress, charging and breaking through enemy lines for her, solving problems for her. This kind of official deserved to be more favored. Although he was not as good as Li Si, he was not an idiot who did not know anything about love. Wasn't the Empress being too nice to him a little too much? It was his first time being someone's official, and he did not know what a favorite official should be like. Moreover, as an insider, Li Mu could not answer this question himself. He decided to find an outsider to ask. Mr. Mei was undoubtedly the best choice. He was the Empress' favorite official, and he knew the Empress best as well as the relationship between him and the Empress. Li Mu took her to a place far away and set up a soundproof array. Mr. Mei looked around and said angrily, why are you being so secretive? Li Mu asked, Sister Mei, do you think Her Majesty treats me well? As soon as he said that, he was hit on the head. You're so heartless. How dare you doubt Her Majesty treats you well? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? Let me tell you, you can doubt anyone but Her Majesty. If Her Majesty doesn't treat you well, no one else in the world will treat you well. Li Mu did not get an answer from Mr. Mei. Instead he was beaten up. He was extremely suspicious that she was abusing her power to avenge a private grudge. At the gate of the Zongjing Temple, Zhang Chun and Prince Shou watched from afar. They did not come up until Mr. Mei left. Zhang Chun asked, how did you offend Mr. Mei? Nothing. Li Mu rubbed his head and asked Zhang Chun casually, Mr. Zhang, do you think Her Majesty treats me well? Zhang Chun stopped and slowly looked at Li Mu saying, Mr. Li, you must have a conscience. How could you doubt, how dare you doubt Her Majesty treats you well? Li Mu explained, that's not what I meant. Zhang Chun asked, then what do you mean? Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, I mean, how did the former emperor treat his favorite officials, compared to Her Majesty's treatment of me? Zhang Chun shook his head and said, I wasn't an official at that time, how would I know? Prince Shou glanced at Li Mu and said lightly, how can the former emperor's favorite officials be compared to you? The former emperor didn't treat you as well as Her Majesty did. Chapter 425. In Li Mu's era, the feudal dynasty had long ceased to exist. He didn't know how the ancient emperors treated their favorite officials. He knew how the emperors treated their concubines. King Zhou was obsessed with Daji's beauty, King Yu of Zhou played with the warlords with the beacon fire just to make Bao Si smile, and Emperor Ming of Tang doted on Yang Guifei. In the future, everyone knew about their deeds. King Shou's words woke Li Mu up. In some people's eyes he was no longer a favored official, but someone like Bao Mo and Daji. Li Mu knew that the Empress treated him well, but he didn't see it as clearly as King Shou and the others. It turned out that the Empress treated him so well. The Empress was the kind of person who would return the favor tenfold if someone treated her well. If Li Mu was a woman it wouldn't be a big deal. The Empress treated Shangwan Li very well too. However, he was a man. If the Empress treated him too well it would cause people to criticize him. However, Li Mu never cared about other people's criticism. Since he came to Shindu the criticism never stopped. He didn't care about these people's criticism. He only cared about the Empress's feelings. After returning to the Li residence, Li Mu looked at the scroll in his hand. After thinking for a long time he took out a sound transmission instrument and said, Qin Shi, help me investigate something, Chang'e Palace. Zhou Yi leaned on the dragon throne with a book in her hand. After reading a page she realized that something was missing. She asked Mr. Mei, where's Li Mu? Li Mu was late but the Empress couldn't help but ask. Mr. Mei sighed and said, Your Majesty, he didn't come to the palace today. Not long after Xiao Bai and Wanwan ran in. Wanwan brought a stick of candied fruit for Zhou Yi and said, Young master asked us to tell Sister Zhou that he has something to do in the North County. He will return to Shindu in a few days. Zhou Yi stood up and frowned. Didn't he just go to the North County? Xiao Bai looked disappointed and said, Benefactor didn't take us with him either. Zhou looked at the stacked memorials on the table and took out a spirit conch. After activating it, he asked, "Why did you go to North Prefecture? Do you still care about the Imperial Court and the Secretariat?" Within the spirit snail, Li Mu's voice was mixed with the sound of the wind. "Your Majesty, Mount Baiyun has summoned me urgently, so I have no choice but to return. I will explain everything to your Majesty when I return to Fairy's capital. I am still on my way, so let's talk later." After that, there was no more sound from the spirit snail. Zhou put away the spiritual snail, gritted his teeth and said, "What urgent summons from Mount Baiyun? Do you think I don't know why you're here? Men are all the same. Once they get married, they forget everything. Back then, you swore that you would be loyal to me and would go through fire and water without hesitation. Now when I need you, you can't even see me." A month passed in the blink of an eye. During this month, the morning court was still held every 3 days. Although the morning court wasn't dull, there weren't any major changes. Without Li Mu, the old and new parties had been quiet for a long time after being defeated by Li Mu. The courtiers had long gotten used to the days without Li Mu. The current imperial court was very different from before. The influence of the old and new parties was not as strong as before. The empress had absolute control over the imperial court, especially the officials led by the left assistant minister of personnel, Xianxia. They gradually formed a force. These people held real power and had a lot of say in the imperial court. They didn't belong to any of the old and new parties and were only loyal to the empress. Although Li Mu wasn't in the imperial court, the great Zhou imperial court was still under his shadow. The people of Fairy's capital hadn't seen Li Mu in a long time. However, as time passed, Li Mu's reputation among the people didn't decrease. Instead, it increased. This half a year was the most comfortable half a year for the people of Fairy's capital in the past few decades. Everything the people of Fairy's capital had today was given to them by one person. He gave the people dignity, justice, and hope for their lives. In the past, Fairy's capital was lifeless. Today, Fairy's capital was filled with boundless vitality. For the past few days, the people in the streets of the Fairy's capital, whether it was the main street or the small alleys, would wake up early and clean the streets in front of their houses. After sweeping, they would rinse the streets with clean water, not leaving a speck of dust or a single leaf. Those who littered on the streets didn't need the authorities. Any commoner who saw them would go forward to stop them. The children of the officials of Fairy's capital didn't dare to ride on horses in Fairy's capital. Even if they rode in carriages or sedan chairs, they had to use roads specially designed for carriages and horses. Those who violated the rules would be severely punished. In just half a month, the entire Fairy's capital became orderly. Of course, part of the reason for this was the intervention of the authorities. However, the commoners didn't object to this. This year was the year when the countries of the Zhu continent paid tribute. From this month onwards, the envoys of the small countries in the south would arrive in Fairy's capital. As citizens of Great Zhou, they had a strong sense of pride. They didn't want to embarrass Great Zhou in front of these small countries. Great Zhou, which was born in the hinterland of Zhongjuan, used to have enemies. However, after the martial emperor, Great Zhou had almost unified the Zhu continent. The remaining small countries in the south also respected Great Zhou. They paid tribute every 5 years in exchange for Great Zhou's protection. This was the first time the various countries paid tribute since the empress ascended the throne. It was even more important to show them the majesty of a great country. 2 men walked on the streets of Fairy's capital. The young man kept looking around as he walked. He sighed and said, "Xiangzhou is indeed Xiangzhou. This is the most prosperous, most imposing and cleanest city I've ever seen." The other middle-aged man shook his head and said in a low voice, "It's only bright on the surface. You have no idea what kind of life the commoners live here are living. What kind of darkness lies beneath all this brightness?" The young man looked around and said doubtfully, "But it looks like they're living a good life." The middle-aged man said faintly, "It's all an act. Every year the Great Zhou court does this. After the tribute, everything goes back to normal." The young man looked carefully again and shook his head. "I don't think they're faking it. Some things can't be faked. You're still young. There are some things you can't see through." The middle-aged man looked at the commoners of Great Zhou who walked past him. His lips moved, but he didn't say anything else. The last time he came to Fairy's capital, it was during the reign of the previous emperor. At that time, Fairy's capital looked brighter on the surface than it was now. However, the commoners of Great Zhou had faces full of numbness and despair. It left a deep impression on him. However, when he came to Fairy's capital again today, it was still the same Fairy's capital. However, the commoners of Great Zhou didn't seem to be the commoners of Great Zhou of the past. The numbness and despair on their faces were no longer there. Instead, it was replaced by smiles from the bottom of their hearts. Every commoner's eyes were shining. Was this still the fairies' capital he knew? The middle-aged man was shocked. He muttered, "What happened here in the past 5 years?" At a tea stall by the roadside, a few passers-by were drinking tea and chatting. "I wonder where Lord Li went. I haven't seen him in a long time. It's been a long time. The last time I saw him was a month ago. Lord Li just got married not long ago. He should be accompanying his wife. We're all experienced people. We can understand. Lord Li will probably come back. I feel uneasy when he's not in Fairy's capital." "Me too. If I don't greet Lord Li every few days, I feel like something is missing. With Lord Li around, there's more to life." A middle-aged man sat by the tea stall. He looked at them and asked curiously, "Excuse me, who is this Lord Li you're talking about?" The few of them looked surprised. They exclaimed, "You don't know Lord Li?" The middle-aged man smiled and said, "We're not from here. We don't know much about Fairy's capital." One of them poured him a cup of tea and said, "Even if you're not from here, it's impossible that you haven't heard of Lord Li. This won't do. I have to explain it to you today." Just as he was about to speak, his body suddenly trembled. He looked ahead. A figure was walking on the street. The commoners crowded around him and greeted him warmly. He hurriedly stood up and waved with a smile. "Lord Li, you're back." Beside the tea stall, 2 figures looked at the young man who was surrounded by the commoners of Fairy's capital. They looked surprised. Li Mu stayed on the street for a long time before he finally entered the palace. At the entrance of Jianghu Palace, he asked Mr. Mei, "Is His Majesty here?" Mr. Mei gave him a look, telling him to be careful later. Li Mu walked into Jianghu Palace. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Your Majesty." Zhou Yi was reviewing memorials. He didn't even raise his head. He said calmly, "It's only been a month. Why didn't you spend more time with your wife on Mount Baiyun? Why did you come back to Fairy's capital?" Li Mu said, "Your Majesty's birthday is coming soon. I have a few gifts for Your Majesty." Zhou Yi finally raised his head. He asked in surprise, "How do you know my birthday?" Li Mu smiled. "Mr. Mei told me." Zhou Yi coughed softly. He asked, "What gifts?" Li Mu stretched out his hand. A few scrolls appeared in his palm. With a thought, the scrolls floated into the air and slowly opened. Zhou Yi took a look and was stunned. She didn't care about her manners. She stood up and said in shock, "Jinren Daoxian's authentic works. There's only one of his authentic works. Where did you find so many?" Li Mu lowered his head. He said, "It's just a coincidence." Zhou Yi looked at him. He counted with his fingers and said in disbelief, "You dug up his tomb?" Chapter 426. Li Mu was taken aback. The Empress could even predict this? He had a sudden thought. Reverend Daoxian was known as the art saint. Among his authentic works, there should at least be a few that were buried with him. As long as they could find his tomb, they would be able to find his authentic works. As the Grand Elder of Corpse Sect, it was normal for him to lead Corpse Sect disciples to rob tombs. Moreover, to the Corpse Sect disciples, there was nothing deeper than robbing tombs together and fighting big dumplings together. In this 1 month, he had shortened the distance between him and the disciples of the Corpse Sect to a great extent, and had also completely gained their trust. However, finding the art saint's tomb was far more difficult than Li Mu had imagined. Reverend Daoxian was an ancient from the previous dynasty. He had fallen more than 1,000 years ago. There were very few records about him. With the help of the Corpse Sect disciples, Li Mu spent almost a month to find his tomb. It was also thanks to the Corpse Sect. They were not good at other things, but digging tombs was something that every Corpse Sect disciple was familiar with. In order to steal strong corpses to refine corpses, they had to be proficient in feng shui knowledge. This was very useful for exploring tombs. An outstanding Corpse Sect disciple was definitely an outstanding feng shui master. A skilled feng shui master did not even need to consult ancient books. They only needed to use their eyes to see if there was an ancient tomb in a place. Based on the feng shui of the tomb, they could determine the position or strength of the corpse of Mu Zhong when he was alive. Reverend Daoxian was the last painting master. After him, the art of painting was cut off. In these years, countless people had searched for his tomb. Naturally, there was a lot of information about this. However, after 1,000 years, no one had found it. The Corpse Sect had searched for it before. However, Everyone knew that Reverend Daoxian, the art saint, had dismembered himself before he fell. His tomb was only a cenotaph. This, to the corpse sect, was naturally boring. Many years ago they spent a lot of effort but still could not find his tomb. The corpse sect gave up immediately. After all, there were more strong warriors' tombs waiting for them to explore. This time, the members of the corpse sect had searched for an entire month. They didn't know how many tombs they had snuck into and investigated before they finally found the tomb of the art saint. The dignified art saint, a powerhouse of his generation, had actually built his tomb in such a simple and crude manner. Ordinary people would probably think that it was a commoner's tomb. This was also the reason why no one had ever found this tomb in the past 1,000 years. If it wasn't for the fact that Li Mu just happened to have an authentic painting of the painting saint in his possession that produced a subtle connection with the objects buried with the tomb, Li Mu would probably have missed it as well. Looking at the Empress's shocked expression, Li Mu said with a straight face, "I am doing this for the inheritance of the art Dao. I believe that Senior Art Saint won't blame me. Besides, there are no remains in his tomb, so it isn't considered an offense. Alright, whose paintings does your majesty like? I will send people to dig them up." The people of the corpse sect are very good at finding and robbing tombs. Mr. May stood in the middle of the hall with a stunned expression on his face. Damn it, this was clearly a very disappointing matter. Why did it sound so sweet when it came from Li Mu's mouth? After Zhou Yi came back to her senses, she hurriedly said, no need." Then she suddenly realized something. Looking at Li Mu, she asked, "Could it be that you weren't at Mount Baiyun this month?" Li Mu still said with some trepidation, "The tomb of the art saint is not easy to find. It was just a coincidence that I almost wasted a month of effort. Fortunately, I managed to find it before your majesty's birthday." Zhou Yi was slightly delighted, but her expression was still dignified. She said, "The tomb is full of dangers. Have you forgotten what happened in the White Emperor's cave? Don't do such dangerous things in the future." Li Mu nodded repeatedly. "I will do as you command." Zhou Yi said lightly, "Go to the back hall. Xiaobai and Wanwan have been thinking about you all day." Li Mu bowed and said, "I will take my leave now." When Li Mu turned and walked into the back hall, the solemnity on Zhou Yi's face disappeared. She admired the few authentic works of the art saint, and the corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl up slightly. Mr. May walked forward and explained, "Your Majesty, I didn't tell him your Majesty's birthday. He must have heard about it from somewhere else. This rascal, he didn't care about court affairs for a month just to flatter your Majesty. He is becoming more and more immature. No wonder people are talking about him behind his back." Zhou Yi nodded deeply and said, "Keep an eye on him. Don't let him fool around anymore." Mr. May raised his head and looked at the Empress. Even his eyes were smiling. He could only say helplessly, "I know." In the back hall of Jianghu Palace, Li Mu hugged Xiaobai and spun around. He gave Wanwan the same treatment. Wanwan hugged his arm and looked at him pitifully. She said, "Sir, next time wherever you go, can you bring us along?" If Li Mu was going to play, of course he would bring them along. But this time he was going to dig up graves. How could he bring two delicate little girls along? But looking at Wanwan's eyes, he couldn't say no. He could only say, "Okay, I promise you. In the future, if I can bring you along, I will try my best. I haven't seen you for a month. Let me check your cultivation first." Wanwan raised her head and said proudly, "I am already at the 4th realm." Although Wanwan's talent was average, she had the Empress's support and had endless cultivation resources. In addition, with the Empress's guidance, her cultivation had already reached the theurgy level at a young age. Because of Ling Tong, her strength was far beyond the theurgy level. If ordinary creation realm cultivators didn't pay attention, they would also be bewitched by her. Xiao Bai's talent wasn't low. Before Li Mu left, she had already advanced to the 5-tailed realm. In this month, her cultivation didn't improve at all. Firstly, she was like Li Mu. Her cultivation was forcefully raised. If she didn't accumulate enough, it would be very difficult for her cultivation to improve. Unless she encountered a great opportunity, it would be very difficult for her to improve in a short time. Under normal circumstances, the Fox clan needed decades to advance from the 5-tailed realm to the 6-tailed realm. And 99% of the 5-tailed foxes would never be able to cross this hurdle in their lifetime. Now, Xiaobai wasn't just facing the problem of stagnation in her cultivation. She still lacked the cultivation method after the 5-tailed realm. Xiaobai's grandmother only had the cultivation method of the Fox clan before the 5th realm. If she wasn't of the Fox clan, Li Mu, who had the Demon clan's heavenly book, could provide her with the cultivation method from the 5th realm to the 9th realm. However, the Fox clan's cultivation method was independent of the demon clan. Li Mu couldn't provide her with any help. Li Mu wasn't the only one who couldn't. The Empress couldn't either. The Fox clan's cultivation method was only passed down to the Fox clan unless they found a 5th realm fox demon. Li Mu knew a 5th realm fox demon and she owed him a favor. In principle, Li Mu could ask for her favor and pave the way for Xiao Bai's cultivation. However, Phantom Princess was his enemy. It was very likely that he didn't ask for her favor and would end up losing his own life. Moreover, this wasn't a long-term solution. Even if he had the cultivation method for the 5th realm, he still didn't know anything about the 6th realm. When Xiao Bai's cultivation level increased, she would encounter the same problem. Actually, there was another way. That was to let Xiao Bai cultivate the ordinary demon Dao. She was already at the 5th realm and had already surpassed consciousness opening, fetus molding, and transfiguration. She only needed 1 or 2 years to condense a demon core. However, this way her identity as a Fox clan member would be wasted. Even if her cultivation level increased, her mantissa wouldn't increase and she wouldn't have the Fox clan's talent. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Li Mu wouldn't let her take this path. If she could obtain the Fox clan's heavenly book from the Illusion Lord, Xiao Bai's cultivation would be smooth sailing. However, it wasn't easy to steal a treasure from a fox's mouth. He could only find another opportunity in the future. Li Mu stroked Xiao Bai's head and said, "Don't worry. I'll find the cultivation method for you after the 5th realm as soon as possible." After accompanying Xiao Bai and Wan for a while, they went to play by themselves. Li Mu stayed in the room alone. He stretched out his hand and a brush appeared in his hand. This brush was found by Li Mu in the painting sage's cenotaph. This brush was identical to the brush used by the old man at the bow of the boat in the painting. It was likely an item belonging to the painting sage. However, Li Mu couldn't create something out of nothing with this brush. This meant that the profundity of this art lay in the caster and not the brush. This was a large part of the reason why the painting Dao was cut off. Be it the Buddhist Dao, the demonic Dao, or the ghost Dao, it was very easy to gain a rudimentary understanding of cultivation. All one needed to do was cultivate step by step. Therefore they were able to endure for so long. For artists and musicians, to gain a rudimentary understanding of their arts, one had to have superb artistic attainments. Just this alone was enough to keep most people at bay. Without anyone cultivating it, it wasn't surprising that the heritage was cut off. However, no matter how difficult this path was, Li Mu had to give it a try. The painting sage's divine power of painting in the void gave Li Mu a great deal of inspiration. The painting Dao could create something out of nothing. If he used the same method to draw talismans, wouldn't he be able to save talisman materials and condense talismans in the void? Li Mu thought about it carefully and felt that this idea was very feasible. If he wanted to cultivate the painting Dao, he had to start by learning how to draw. This was also the first time Li Mu realized that he didn't have any artistic talent. With his cultivation he could control every muscle in his body, including his hands. However, drawing required more than just the control of the body. It was the same landscape painting, but Li Mu had imitated Dao Xian's authentic work. On the surface, there was not much difference between the two paintings, but when one compared them, one would have to wonder what exactly he had painted. In the room, Li Mu looked at a new painting on the table and frowned. The Empress walked in from outside and asked, "What are you doing?" Li Mu said, "Your Majesty, can you help me take a look and see what's wrong with this painting of mine? It has form but no spirit. You haven't gained a rudimentary understanding of it." Zhou Yi glanced at it and said lightly. She then asked, "You want to learn to draw?" Li Mu nodded and said, "It seems that I can't just draw blindly. I have to find someone to guide me." "Who should I find?" The Empress looked at the painting and coughed lightly. Li Mu suddenly looked at the Empress and his eyes lit up. He was really stupid. The person who could teach him how to draw was so close and so far away. He looked at the Empress and said, "The painting skills of the painters in the palace are definitely not bad. Can I have them teach me how to draw?" Chapter 427. In the back hall of Jianghu Palace, Zhou Yi fell silent after hearing Li Mu's words. Li Mu saw that she didn't answer for a long time and couldn't help but ask, "Your Majesty, can't I?" Zhou Yi glanced at him and said lightly, "Yes, but there are many rules for painters in the palace. Even if you want to learn, they may not be willing to teach you. If they don't want to, I can't force them." Li Mu nodded and said, "Of course. If they don't want to, I can only find someone else. Zhou Yi walked to the front hall and glanced at Mr. Mei. She said, Mei Wei, go to the secretary department and find a painter to teach Li Mu how to paint. Say it's under my orders. Mr. Mei bowed and said, Yes, Your Majesty. Zhou Yi added, If the painter doesn't want to, don't force him. Mr. Mei looked up at her and met her eyes. He nodded and said, I understand. Li Mu wanted to choose his own teacher. He walked to Mr. Mei and said, I'll go with you. You stay. Zhou Qiong glanced at him and said in an unquestionable tone, As an official of the imperial court, you left your post without my permission for more than a month. I haven't punished you yet. You stand here for 15 minutes and reflect. Yes, Your Majesty. Li Mu sighed and obediently stood where he was. Although he had wanted to give the Empress a surprise and at the same time try to find an inheritance of the art Dao, he had also violated the rules of the imperial court and should be punished. Moreover, he wasn't a primary school student. Standing for 15 minutes wasn't a punishment at all. Li Mu stood in the hall. Zhou Yi didn't sit down. She walked to him and said, In addition, without my permission, you're not allowed to dig people's graves. If there's a next time, it won't be as simple as standing. Li Mu said sincerely, I know my mistake. No matter what, entering someone else's tomb was always immoral. Moreover, it was disrespectful to the dead. He was not Thousand Illusions and did not really like this. With the Empress's permission, for example, entering the White Emperor cave and getting the page of the Tomes of Arcane was a reasonable archaeological excavation. Or, for the sake of passing down the painting doctrine, visiting the tomb of the painting saint from 1,000 years ago was justifiable. In order to unravel the mysteries of the ancient era and explore the ancient history, it was not only the demonic Dao, but also the righteous Dao cultivators. If there were similar situations in the future, he could just apply to her first. In Chang'e Palace, Li Mu stood obediently as punishment. In the Secretary Province, Mr. Mei had already summoned 3 court painters. Although their cultivations weren't high, they were all existences standing at the pinnacle of Great Zhou's painting and calligraphy world. They represented the pinnacle of Great Zhou's art. An old man bowed and asked, What orders do you have, sir? Lord Mei said indifferently, You are the most experienced and skilled painters in the palace. Li Mu, the Imperial Secretariat's official, is currently learning how to paint. He wants to find one of you to teach him. The white-haired old man stepped forward and said, I admire Sir Li's actions very much. I'm willing to use all my life's knowledge to teach Sir Li painting skills. The other middle-aged man didn't dare to show weakness and said, It's my honor to teach Sir Li. I'm also willing to teach him all my painting skills. The last young man said, If Sir Li is interested in painting women, you can come to me at any time. Mr. Mei glanced at them and asked, Your painting skills can't be easily taught to outsiders, so no one will teach him, understand? The old man was puzzled and asked, Why? The middle-aged man was surprised and said, Our master didn't set such a rule. The young man was puzzled and asked, Why is that? Mr. Mei said coldly, You don't have to ask why. If Li Mu asked, just say so. If anyone wants to teach him, they don't have to come tomorrow. The 3 men's expressions became serious and they immediately spoke. Yes, sir. Understood. Understood. After Lord Mei left, the 3 of them looked at each other with puzzled expressions. One moment he's allowed to teach, the next moment he's not. Is he going to teach or not? Of course not. Didn't you hear what Commander Mei said at the end? Whoever dares to teach him can pack up and go home tomorrow. Let's listen to Commander Mei. She's by His Majesty's side. Her wishes are His Majesty's wishes. We can't go against his orders. If he wants to teach, then teach. If he doesn't want to teach, then don't teach. What is His Majesty playing at? Alright, I remember that His Majesty also likes painting. The Art Saint's original work is in His Majesty's hands. If he doesn't want us to teach him, does His Majesty want to teach him himself? Shu, be careful with your words, Chang'e Palace. Li Mu had been standing there for 15 minutes. He was eating the grapes given by the Empress while waiting for Mr. Mei to return. Li Mu was quite confident about this matter. Although many people in Fairy's capital didn't like him, there were even more people who liked him. He wasn't loved by everyone, but with his status, it shouldn't be a problem to hire a few court painters to teach him painting. Moreover, the Empress had given him a verbal order not to force them. It was just a casual remark. Everyone knew that the Empress favored him the most. If anyone dared to refuse, they wouldn't have to come to work tomorrow. Soon, footsteps could be heard outside Chang'e Palace. Mr. Mei walked in and bowed. Your Majesty, none of the 3 painters are willing to teach him. Li Mu was stunned. Then he asked in disbelief, "Why?" Lord Mei explained, "They said that their painting skills are not taught to outsiders, so they can't teach you." Zhou Yi glanced at Li Mu and said calmly, "Since they have such a rule, I can't force them. You'd better find someone else." Li Mu couldn't accept this fact. He personally went to the Secretary Province and found the three painters. The old man said apologetically, "Lord Li, I'm really sorry. Please forgive me for not being able to help you. I once swore to the heavens that I wouldn't teach my painting skills to anyone else. Otherwise, I'd be struck by lightning and die a horrible death." Li Mu looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man immediately said, "Same for me." The young man also immediately said, "Same for me." Li Mu shook his head and said disappointedly, "I finally know why the art of painting was cut off. If the painters in the past were like you, it would be strange if the art of painting didn't change." Li Mu had been curious before. Taoism was easy to get started with, and it was easy to get started with it. Furthermore, it was open to the public and did not hide anything. It served them right to flourish. Even if it was harder to learn the art of painting, could it be harder than legalism? Nowadays, legalism still appeared often, but there were no painters. This might be the reason. However, Li Mu couldn't force others to follow this rule. At most, he could only lament their misfortune and be angry at their incompetence. After returning from the Secretary Province, Mr. Mei suddenly said, "Why don't you let Her Majesty teach you?" Li Mu was stunned. He asked, "Does Her Majesty know how to paint?" Mr. Mei rolled his eyes and said, "Why do you think Her Majesty likes to collect the works of the art saint? Her Majesty has liked to paint since she was young. Her painting skills are comparable to the top painters in the palace." Li Mu knew that the Empress liked to play with flowers and plants. He had known her for so long, but he had never seen her paint. However, there was no need for Sir Mei to lie to him about such things. How could a person who didn't know anything about painting like a painting be his favorite thing? Moreover, when the Empress had commented on his painting, she had seemed to be quite professional. Li Mu sighed softly. He felt like he had searched for her thousands of times in the crowd, but when he looked back, she was in the dim light. It was just that the light was too dazzling, and Li Mu didn't notice it for a moment. It turned out that the Empress was the person he had been looking for. Jianghu Palace. Wan Wan looked at the table full of dishes and said in surprise, "What's the occasion today? Why are there so many dishes?" Xiaobai looked and said, "They all seem to be Sister Zhou's favorite." Wan Wan said, "I like them too." Xiaobai muttered, "As long as it's edible, you like it?" Li Mu patted their heads and said, "Today is your Sister Zhou's birthday." Every dish on the table was made by Li Mu himself, and they were all the Empress's favorites. He hadn't made so many dishes for a long time. This time he had to be more attentive since he had a favor to ask. After eating and drinking, the two lively girls went out to digest. Li Mu looked at the Empress and asked with a smile, "Are these dishes to your liking, Your Majesty?" Zhou Yi nodded and said, "Yes, you are very considerate." Li Mu struck while the iron was hot and said, "Your Majesty, I have a presumptuous request." Zhou Yi said indifferently, "What is it?" "Say it." Li Mu raised his head and said, "Mr. Mei said that Your Majesty's painting skills are unparalleled. I would like to ask Your Majesty to teach me how to paint." Zhou Yi thought for a moment and said, "For the sake of these dishes, I agree. Mei Wei, prepare the brush and ink." Chapter 428. In Chang'e Palace, Li Mu quietly watched the Empress paint. At this moment, the Empress was the most serious, just like when she was trimming the flowers and plants. She painted the same landscape as Li Mu and used the same brush and ink as Li Mu. The mountains and water in the painting were lively and lively, unlike the empty mountains and stagnant waters in Li Mu's painting. What depressed Li Mu the most was that the two paintings looked similar at first glance, but when he felt it carefully, there was a world of difference. After finishing the last stroke, the Empress put down the brush and said softly, "The art saint once said that there are 3 realms in painting. Painting the mountain is a mountain, painting the water is water. Painting the mountain is not a mountain, painting the water is not water. Painting the mountain is still a mountain, painting the water is still water. You have only just entered the first realm. You can barely draw the shape of the mountains and rivers, but you can't draw the meaning of the mountains and rivers." Li Mu asked, "How can I draw the meaning of the mountains and rivers?" The Empress said leisurely, "See more and paint more. When you have enough experience, you will naturally be able to draw the meaning of the mountains and rivers. I will teach you the basic techniques first. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me." Li Mu asked again, How long will it take for me to reach the second realm? Zhou Yi said indifferently, at least 2 to 3 years, at most 20 to 30 years. It depends on your comprehension. The improvement of one's painting skills couldn't be achieved in a day. Li Mu could only learn slowly from the Empress. The Empress would give Li Mu pointers every day. Other than the basic practice, Li Mu would also immerse himself in the art saint's authentic works and seriously comprehend them. He would improve a lot every day. These days, what surprised Li Mu was that the Empress was actually so artistic. In the past, Li Mu's understanding of her was limited to the fact that she was beautiful, a cultivation genius, a seventh realm elite, a petty and simple queen who liked to play with flowers and plants, and a sweet and naive one. If the Empress hadn't mentioned it, Li Mu wouldn't have known that she was also a master painter. Later on, he found out that before he entered the palace, Zhou Yi of the Zhou clan was famous in the divine capital for his talent in cultivation and his attainments in painting. Li Mu had been with the Empress for a long time. Based on his understanding of her, when Zhou Qiong was a young girl, she probably only wanted to have her own flower garden in the future so that she could plant flowers and paint when she was in the mood. But after she became an adult, these things became more and more distant from her. Mr. Mei and Li Mu walked in the palace. She let out a sigh of relief and smiled. Ever since you came to the palace, everything has changed. In the past, the emperor could only go to the royal garden after morning court. He had no time to paint. Sometimes when I patrolled late at night, I could still see the emperor sitting on the roof. Li Mu rolled his eyes at her and said, "Isn't it because the things that should have been done by His Majesty have been done by me these days? Otherwise, His Majesty wouldn't have so much free time?" Mr. Mei smiled and said, "That's why, if only you had entered the palace 3 years earlier. If you had entered the palace 3 years earlier, the emperor wouldn't have had to suffer these 3 years. 3 years ago, Li Mu wasn't Li Mu yet, so such a possibility didn't exist. For the current Li Mu, if he had to deal with memorials every day, he would also be annoyed. It was better to help the Empress complete her great cause and then live in seclusion in the fields, planting vegetables and flowers." In the past year, the faith of the people in the 36 counties of the Great Zhou had almost doubled compared to a few years ago. In terms of governance, the only emperor in the history of the Great Zhou who could compare to the Empress was Emperor Wen. If the current policy was maintained and the people were allowed to recuperate for 10 years, surpassing Emperor Wen wouldn't be difficult. In these 10 years, the faith of the people in the Great Zhou would gradually stabilize and wouldn't increase too much. In this way, the nurturing of the emperor's qi would be far away in the future. To accelerate the nurturing of the emperor's qi and allow the empress to be liberated sooner, the only way was to greatly increase the faith of the people in the counties. Once the faith of the people had stabilized, internal factors alone wouldn't be able to stimulate the people. At this time, some external stimulation would be needed. For example, subduing the Yao Kingdom and the Ghost Realm, eliminating the Demon Sect, or unifying the Zhu Province. These things could greatly stimulate the people of the Great Zhou and make their support for the Empress reach a peak. Naturally, there was no need to worry about the faith of the people. However, none of these things were easy to accomplish. On the contrary, it was easy to waste all the previous efforts. Once the Yao Kingdom or the Ghost Realm invaded, or the Demon Sect wreaked havoc in the counties, causing the Great Zhou to be in turmoil, all the efforts he and the Empress had put in over the past year would be wasted. Of course, the Great Zhou could still keep these forces in check at the moment. The only trouble was the southern countries. For a long time, the southern countries were vassals of the Great Zhou. Every year they paid tribute. The Great Zhou provided protection for them. At that time, the Great Zhou was undoubtedly the overlord of the Zhu continent. However, the successive 2 incapable emperors caused the Great Zhou's national strength to rapidly decline within a few decades. It also caused the vassal countries in the south to have disloyalty. In these few decades, the tributes from the various countries went from once a year to once every 2 years, once every 3 years, and once every 5 years until the end of the previous emperor's reign. Now, the Shao royal family had even lost control of the Great Zhou. Such a large empire had fallen into the hands of a woman. The thoughts of the various countries became more active. This time, the ambassadors of the various countries took advantage of the tributes and gathered in Chengdu. They had already communicated with each other. It seemed that they had reached some kind of tacit agreement to completely break away from the Great Zhou and cancel the tributes. Although this didn't cause any substantial losses to the Great Zhou, it was a huge blow to the hearts of the people. The Great Zhou used to be the Celestial Empire. The surrounding countries all submitted to it. If the various countries broke away from the Great Zhou while the Empress was on the throne, it would be a great sin that the Empress couldn't make up for with any achievements. Although this was a mess left behind by the previous two emperors of the Great Zhou, they were already dead. The people would only blame the empress. Li Mu pondered for a moment. He looked at Mr. Mei and asked, "Is it true that the various countries want to break away from the Great Zhou?" Speaking of this, Mr. Mei's expression became serious. He nodded and said, "It is true. In these few decades, the various countries have become more and more dissatisfied with the Great Zhou. The last time the various countries paid tribute, because of the previous emperor's incompetence, caused the imperial court to lose face in front of the ambassadors of the various countries. It also caused them to become disloyal. In these 5 years from the passing of the previous emperor, to the Zhou family seizing the emperor's qi, and the ascension of the empress, the Great Zhou has been in turmoil. Their ambitions can't be hidden anymore," Li Mu said calmly. "This is normal. Who wants to be a vassal of others forever? To them they probably want the Great Zhou to be destroyed. They want to take advantage of the chaos to carve up the Great Zhou." Mr. Mei said angrily, "A bunch of immature wolves. They probably forgot who helped them defend against the enemies of Yanzhou and Changzhou. Without the Great Zhou they would have been swallowed up by others long ago. Not even dregs are left." Li Mu shook his head and said, "Calm down. Times have changed. It is no longer the time of the previous emperor. Even if they really have disloyalty, I'm afraid they don't have the guts." Honglu Temple. The residence of the various countries' ambassadors. In a courtyard, a middle-aged man in a long robe and a young man beside him stood quietly in the courtyard. Their gazes were looking in the direction of the imperial palace. Their eyes shone with a golden light. At the end of their line of sight, a certain part of the sky was shining with golden light. It didn't take long for the golden light in their eyes to disappear. That part of the sky also returned to its original color. The young man asked doubtfully, "Didn't Sir say that the Great Zhou's destiny has come to an end, and that the common people are disloyal to the court? Why is there still so much psychokinesis in the Great Zhou ancestral temple?" The middle-aged man said in a deep voice, "The Great Zhou of today is no longer the Great Zhou of the past. I originally thought that the Great Zhou replacing the Shao family was the last bit of destiny for the Great Zhou. I didn't expect that in just 5 years, no, in just 1 year, the Great Zhou would return to its 100-year-old peak." The young man asked, "Then do we still want to leave the Great Zhou?" The middle-aged man said softly, "Let's wait and see first." A strange light flashed in his eyes. He said meaningfully, "Li Mu." A rueful look appeared in the young man's eyes. He said, "That Li Mu is truly formidable. He actually has the ability to change the destiny of a country. If my great Yong also had such a character, the national strength would definitely be even more prosperous. In 100 years we might be able to unify the ancestral province." In the Chang'e Palace, the corners of Zhou Yi's mouth curled up. He said disdainfully, "In your dreams?" Li Mu, who was in the middle of painting, raised his head. He asked doubtfully, "What did your Imperial Majesty just say?" Zhou Yi's expression returned to normal. He said, "Nothing. Continue painting. Don't get distracted." Chapter 429. In the Chang'e Palace, Li Mu was painting seriously. These days, he gradually felt that it was not a bad thing that the painters in the palace were not willing to teach him. The empress's attainments in painting were extremely high, and when she taught him, she was gentle and responsible. In just 2 days, Li Mu had already forgotten all about being a court painter, and was wholeheartedly focused on learning from the empress. Zhou Yi stood beside Li Mu. As she looked, she said, "In painting there is no need to stick to the appearance. You have to use the appearance to write the spirit. You have to search for the feeling between resemblance and non-resemblance." Li Mu carefully pondered her words. After a while, the empress sat back on the dragon throne and said softly, "Later today the imperial court will invite the ambassadors of the various countries to a banquet in the Chaoyang Hall. You will go with the officials of the secretariat." Great Zhou was the sovereign state. Every time they paid tribute, they would invite the ambassadors of the various countries. At that time, besides the important officials of the imperial court, the empress would also attend. After finishing this painting, Li Mu went to the secretariat. Today's banquet was only for officials of the 4th rank and above. In the secretariat, only the head of the secretariat and 2 assistant ministers were qualified. Li Mu had just returned to the duty room when Louis walked in and asked, "Will Lord Li also attend today's banquet?" Li Mu nodded and said, "Her Majesty has asked me to go with the officials of the secretariat." Although Li Mu's rank was not high enough, it was within Lu Yi's expectations that he would go. He smiled and said, In that case I will call Lord Li again later. There was still some time before the banquet, so Li Mu had nothing to do. He stretched out his hand. With a flash of white light, the art saint's brush appeared in his hand. He gripped the brush and attempted to draw a few strokes in the void, yet nothing was left behind. Li Mu had the Empress try before, and she was also unable to use the ultimate art of creating something from nothing of the painting path. It was fine if Li Mu couldn't do it, but even the Empress couldn't. Li Mu had reason to suspect that this technique was the same as Dao techniques and mystical powers. It should also require a chant or an incantation. Unfortunately, the tomb of the art saint was very simple. Other than this brush and a few authentic works, there was nothing else. On the Dao of painting, Li Mu encountered the same predicament as Xiao Bai. They both lacked cultivation dermic formulations. Xiao Bai's predicament was easy to resolve. The White Fox race was still a large Fey race, but the Dao of painting had not appeared for a long time. At present, the only thing Li Mu could do was to learn painting from the Empress and wait for the right opportunity. Half an hour later, Li Mu, Lu Yi, and the others walked towards the Chaiyang Hall. This hall was to the left of the Crepe Myrtle Hall. During the time of the previous emperor, he often held banquets for officials and clans. Walking into the Chaiyang Hall, Li Mu walked to his seat and sat down looking across. At this banquet, the officials of the Great Zhou sat on the left, and the ambassadors of the various countries sat on the right. Across from Li Mu were the ambassadors of the various countries. There were more than 10 small countries in the southeast and southwest of Zhou province. The combined area of these small countries was only half the size of Great Zhou. In these 100 years they were all vassals of Great Zhou. They paid tribute to Great Zhou and Great Zhou provided them with protection. Other than this relationship, Great Zhou would not interfere with their internal affairs. Among these countries, Liang, Yu, Jiang, Jing, Xin, and Yong were the most powerful. Among the 6 Taoist sects, other than the Fulu school and Xuanzong, which were located in Great Zhou, the other 4 sects were located in Liang, Yu, Jiang, and Jing. Relying on these 4 sects, these 4 countries had considerable influence in the south. Although Xin did not have a Taoist sect, it was the birthplace of Buddhism. Among the various countries, it had the largest area and the largest population. Its strength could not be underestimated. In the past, Xin was a formidable rival of Great Zhou. When Great Zhou was first established, Xin took advantage of the Great Zhou's instability to provoke Great Zhou. Taizu sent troops to attack Xin's capital. If it were not for Great Zhou's policy of peace, Xin would have long been erased from the Zhou continent. Since then, Xinhua had been completely well-behaved. For a long time, Xin had the ambition to become the overlord of the Zhou continent. However, due to the existence of Great Zhou, they could only settle for second place. Even so, they never extinguished their desire to dominate. Although Yong did not have any powerful sects, Yong's imperial family was extremely powerful. They had more than one expert of the upper realm, far surpassing the Great Zhou's Xiao clan. What was even rarer was that as Great Zhou's emperors grew more and more muddle-headed with each generation, Yong produced 5 generations of wise emperors. They worked hard for 100 years, sweeping away all obstacles within the country and completing the peaceful unification of the country. During these 100 years, Yong's national strength steadily increased. In Zhuzhou, it was the 3rd most powerful country, second only to Great Zhou and Xin. In the beginning, the other countries were very submissive to Great Zhou, practically kneeling and begging. They wanted to use their tributes in exchange for Great Zhou's protection. Without Great Zhou, they would have to face enemies from other continents. However, following the decline of Great Zhou, their thoughts naturally changed. They began to look forward to Great Zhou's destruction and its replacement as the new overlord of the Zhou continent. However, the previous emperor's muddle-headedness had caused Great Zhou to sink into a quagmire. Coincidentally, the Great Zhou had rebelled and seized power, causing Great Zhou to become even more chaotic. The other countries' thoughts were bound to become even more active. This tribute had to intimidate these people enough. Otherwise, Great Zhou would lose its right to speak on the Zhou continent and its prestige as a great country. While Li Mu was observing the various countries' envoys, a man seated across from him, wearing clothes different from those of Great Zhou, called over the eunuch behind him and asked in a low voice, "Who is Lord Li Mu of your esteemed country?" The eunuch looked across, his gaze searching. Replying to the envoy, starting from the table directly across from you, the 3rd person on the left is Lord Li Mu. The man, as well as the several people at the 2 tables beside him, looked over at the same time, their hearts trembling. He's that Li Mu? He's so young. Great Zhou has changed too much in the past few years. This person is so young but his methods are so powerful. Everyone had been in Luoyang for several days and was no stranger to Li Mu's name. On the first day they arrived in Luoyang, they had heard of his name in the ears of the common people. At first they were curious, but after some investigation they were only left with shock. Abolishing the criminal substitution law, reforming the recruitment of officials, cleaning up the academy's court, attacking the old and new parties, and taking back power to the Empress of Great Zhou. Everything he did was earth-shattering. Who didn't know about the criminal substitution law of Great Zhou? This law separated the common people from the nobles. Although it was convenient for the nobles and officials, it was a nightmare for the poor common people. Ever since this law was promulgated, the faith of the people of Great Zhou decreased year by year. The various countries saw this and were happy in their hearts. The Emperor of Great Zhou was so muddle-headed, and the court was so decadent. It would be best if the various counties of Great Zhou rose up in revolt and rebelled against the court. This would also give them an opportunity to take advantage of and divide up Great Zhou. From then on, they would no longer have to submit to others. However, in the past 5 years this law had been abolished. Li Mu had also used a few cases to trick the previous emperor into giving away the death exemption golden medallion. From then on, the nobles who broke the law would be punished the same as the common people. After these things the people of Great Zhou began to unite again. In addition, Li Mu had also proposed the imperial examination, breaking the academy's dictatorship. He had recruited talents from the local areas and once again united the people's hearts. This was far from enough. In the past few years, the court of Great Zhou had been firmly controlled by the old and new parties. It had been in a state of internal friction. However, in the past 2 years, it had been attacked by Li Mu at the same time, greatly strengthening the centralization of power of the Empress of Great Zhou. In the past 5 years, earth-shattering things had happened in Great Zhou. Outsiders had seized power and the country had changed owners. The various countries thought that the opportunity they had been waiting for 100 years had come. They were about to take advantage of this tribute to renegotiate terms with the Great Zhou. However, after arriving at Luoyang, everything here made them dumbfounded. There were no common people living in the abyss of suffering, nor was there an imperial court that was about to collapse. Great Zhou was still the powerful Great Zhou. They cleaned up the Great Zhou internally and reformed the evil laws. They were also extremely strong externally. Even the powerful demon path had suffered a lot at their hands. They were silent for a while and this completely disrupted their plans. And all of this was because of the man opposite them. He had saved a building from collapse. He was deeply trusted by the people of Great Zhou. He was the most favored official of the Empress of Great Zhou. He was Li Mu of the Secretariat. In the eyes of the crowd there was pity, admiration, and resentment. They regretted that they had lost the opportunity they had waited so long for. They admired Li Mu's actions. Putting aside their standpoints, what he had done was worthy of everyone's admiration. It was normal for them to feel resentment. Because of this person's existence, their many years of anticipation had gone up in smoke. How could they not hate him? Soon, the expressions of the 2 envoys from the Xin nation, who had hidden resentment in their eyes, changed. Their emotions and strength were actually being sucked away by someone through the air. The 2 of them immediately guarded their hearts and minds, and only then did they manage to guard the power of their emotions. In the great hall, several gazes swept over Li Mu. The calm secretary of the Secretariat revealed a meaningful smile on his face. Li Mu tilted his head slightly and asked Lu Yi, who was beside him, "Lord Lu, which country are the 2 people wearing hats opposite us from?" Lu Yi looked up and said, "They are the envoys from the Xin nation." Li Mu understood and said, "As expected, they are from the Xin nation." Among the countries in the Zhou continent, the Xin nation was the one that refused to accept the Great Zhou the most. For a long time, the Xin nation regarded itself as the overlord of the Zhou continent. Their self-confidence was extremely inflated. They wanted to bully the Great Zhou that had just been established and its foundation was not very stable. Instead, they were attacked by the Great Zhou near their capital and were almost destroyed. Only then did they become well-behaved and pay tribute every year to show their allegiance. In these years, although the Xin nation had not developed much, the Great Zhou had been declining. If one were to say who in the Zhou continent wanted the Great Zhou to collapse and disappear, it would undoubtedly be the Xin nation. Lu Yi's mouth twitched and said, "The Xin nation has always wanted to see us make a fool of ourselves. This time I'm afraid they will be disappointed." The Xin nation's envoy had suffered a hidden loss at the hands of Li Mu, but he did not dare to act up. After glaring angrily at Li Mu, he looked away. As the banquet began, the gazes on Li Mu gradually decreased. However, Li Mu noticed that a gaze diagonally to his left was always on him. Li Mu followed the gaze and saw a young man hurriedly look away. Li Mu casually asked Lu Yi, "Which country is that young man from?" Lu Yi looked and said, "He should be from the Yong Kingdom." The Yong Kingdom was not large, but its strength was not weak. This was especially true for the Yong royal family, which was the most powerful in the Zhou continent. In terms of the number of experts in the upper realm, the Yong Kingdom was comparable to the 6 schools and 4 sects. The Yong Kingdom had produced 5 wise rulers in succession and could be considered a legend in the Zhou continent. Li Mu's gaze swept past the young man and looked at the middle-aged man beside him. The man's aura was concealed and not a trace was leaked. He looked like a mortal who had never cultivated. However, the Yong Kingdom would not send a mortal. Even if his cultivation had not reached the 7th realm, it should be very close. Li Mu's gaze quickly returned to the young man. It was not because he was handsome, but because although he was no longer looking at Li Mu, he had begun to steal glances at the Empress. From time to time, his gaze would glance at the curtains in front of him. When he noticed that Li Mu was looking at him, he immediately lowered his head and focused on the food on the table in front of him. The young man discovered that every time he tried to steal a glance at the legendary figure of the Zhou continent behind the curtains, a gaze would fall on him. After a few times, he no longer dared to steal another glance. The atmosphere at the banquet was exceptionally harmonious. None of the envoys from the various countries proposed to leave the Great Zhou and stop paying tribute. They had already reached an agreement on this matter. However, what they had seen and heard in the Great Zhou over the past few days forced them to be cautious. When the banquet was about to end, Mr. Mei walked in from outside and hurried behind the curtains. He seemed to have something urgent to attend to. Li Mu noticed that an envoy from the Xin Kingdom sitting opposite him seemed to have received some kind of message. His expression slowly darkened. He left his seat and walked to the center of the hall. In a deep voice he said, "Your Majesty, I have just learned that a citizen of my country has been killed in your country. You must give us a satisfactory explanation for this matter. Otherwise, the Xin Kingdom will no longer pay tribute to the Great Zhou Empire." When the courtiers in the hall heard this, they were immediately in an uproar. Even if it was an ordinary case of murder, they could not afford to be careless. At a critical juncture when the various countries were paying tribute, a citizen of another country had been killed in the Great Zhou. The impact would be even worse. If they were not careful, it would incite conflict between countries. This was especially so when the Xin Kingdom was already disloyal. They could use this as an excuse. Mr. Mei walked out from behind the curtains and said, "Your Majesty, please move to the Ziwei Palace and order the Ministry of Justice to immediately bring the people involved in this case to the palace." Assistant Minister Yang of the Ministry of Justice stood out and said respectfully, "Yes, Your Majesty." After that, he strode out of the hall and quickly walked out of the palace. Ministry of Justice. A group of people gathered outside the Ministry of Justice and discussed animatedly. That citizen of the Xin Kingdom clearly fell on his own and hit the stone steps. He can't blame anyone else. But if that young man didn't chase after him, he wouldn't have fallen. Nonsense. If he didn't steal, would others chase after him? But he's dead in the end, and he's from another country. I'm afraid that young man will have to pay with his life. Within the Ministry of Justice, Assistant Minister Yang looked at Wei Peng inside. He said, "The envoy of the Xin Kingdom is using this opportunity to make a statement. If this matter isn't handled well, I'm afraid that something big will happen." "Where's that criminal? I have to bring him to the palace." Wei Peng nodded and said, "He's in the prison. I'll go get him." He walked into the prison of the Ministry of Justice and opened a cell door. He said to a pale-faced young man, "Let's go. I'm afraid this is your only chance to enter the palace in your life." The young man's face was filled with despair. He said in a trembling voice, "Sir, I don't want to die yet." Wei Peng glanced at him and asked, "Why do you want to die?" The young man's body trembled. He said with infinite regret, "If I didn't chase after him, he wouldn't have died." Wei Peng asked in return, "You were just in a hurry. When did you chase after him?" Chapter 430. Outside the prison. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Yang Lin, shook his head at Wei Peng and said, "It's useless. Once we reach the Golden Palace, we just need to search his soul and the truth will be revealed. Have you forgotten what happened 5 years ago?" Wei Peng patted the thick law of the Great Zhou in his arms. He looked at the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice and said meaningfully, "Sir, times have changed." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice sighed and said, "I don't know if times have changed or not. I only know that during this year of tribute, the Shin Kingdom has always had ulterior motives. They will definitely use this as a pretext to make a fuss. This time they will definitely not let go of this opportunity." He patted Wei Peng's shoulder and said, "Let's go. You also go to the palace. You know more about this case than I do. When we reach the palace, be careful what you say." The young man looked nervously at Wei Peng and asked, "Sir, I have never been to the palace. What should I do later?" Wei Peng said indifferently, "It's very simple. When we reach the palace, don't say or do anything. Palace, Crepe Myrtle Palace." Today's lunch banquet was already nearing its end. After the emergency of the Shin Kingdom people dying in the Great Zhou's Shindu, the important officials of the Great Zhou all moved to the Crepe Myrtle Palace. The envoys of the various countries also followed. At this time, most of the officials still didn't know what had happened. Soon, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice brought two people into the palace. After the report, everyone knew what had happened. This Shin Kingdom person had stolen a precious piece of jewelry from a jade shop in the Shindu. After being discovered by the shopkeeper, he fled through the door. The shopkeeper went out to chase after the thief, but because of his old age, he was left further and further behind by the thief. A passerby saw injustice on the road and helped the shopkeeper chase after the thief from the Shin Kingdom. Unexpectedly, the thief panicked and accidentally fell. Coincidentally, his head hit the top of the stone steps on the street. Immediately his brain splattered and he died. As a result, the courageous citizen of the Great Zhou became the murderer of this person. In the palace, many of the officials of the Great Zhou had extremely gloomy expressions. Every time the various countries paid tribute, other than diplomatic missions, there would also be some merchants accompanying them, bringing goods from various countries to be sold in the divine capital. In the beginning, when Great Zhou was at its peak, all countries, regardless of whether they were diplomatic missions or merchants, were well behaved and abided by the laws of Great Zhou. They didn't dare to do anything that violated the law. But in the past 50 years, with the decline of Great Zhou's national power, the intervals between tributes from other countries gradually increased, and the tributes gradually decreased. The actions of foreigners in Great Zhou also became more and more unbridled. By the time of the previous emperor, Great Zhou had completely lost the spirit of a great country. Furthermore, in order to rope in these small countries and prevent them from leaving the Great Zhou while he was in power, the previous emperor even gave them a lot of preferential treatment. From the beginning, merchants from other countries were exempted from all taxes in the Great Zhou, to indulging them in breaking the law and even committing crimes within the Great Zhou's borders. The law of Great Zhou could govern the citizens of Great Zhou, but it couldn't govern the citizens of other countries. This caused the previous emperor's reign to be the most aggrieved period for the citizens and officials of Great Zhou. This aggrieved feeling reached its peak 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the last time the various countries paid tribute, a merchant from the Shin nation raped a woman in the divine capital and was injured by a righteous man. The Shin nation diplomatic mission flew into a rage and threatened that if Great Zhou didn't give them a satisfactory explanation, they would sever their tributes with Great Zhou. In order to maintain stability, the previous emperor publicly executed that righteous man, but released the criminal from the Shin nation. This became the most humiliating diplomatic incident in the history of Great Zhou. It forcefully broke the backbone of the citizens of Great Zhou, causing the citizens of other countries, especially those from the Shin nation, to act recklessly in Great Zhou. However, the citizens of Great Zhou didn't dare to voice their anger. 5 years later, this scene repeated itself once again. Perhaps Xianxia had done it on purpose. In the Crepe Myrtle Palace, the Shin nation diplomatic mission said with a cold expression, "A citizen of my Shin nation died in your Great Zhou. The Great Zhou court must severely punish the murderer and give us an explanation." At this moment, under the gazes of the people in the imperial court, a figure slowly stepped forward. Wei Peng looked at the Shin nation diplomatic mission and asked, "Murderer? What murderer?" The Shin nation diplomatic mission said, "Of course it's the murderer who caused the deaths of our citizens." Wei Peng shook his head and said, "A merchant from your country committed a theft in the Great Zhou's divine capital. When he was escaping, he accidentally fell and hit the stairs and died. What does this have to do with others? How can there be a murderer?" The Shin nation diplomatic mission said coldly, "Who are you? What does this have to do with this case?" Wei Peng said indifferently, "I am the head of the Ministry of Justice, Wei Peng. I have been invited by my client to act as his defense in this case." I will speak on his behalf. The Xin nation diplomatic mission pondered for a while before he understood that this official from the Great Zhou was trying to exonerate this person. His expression became even more unfriendly as he said, "Even if he stole first, according to the laws of your Great Zhou, this crime does not warrant death. If that person did not chase after him, he would not have died. In the end, this person is still the murderer who caused his death." When the Xin nation diplomatic mission said this, the officials in the imperial court could already confirm that the Xin nation had come prepared this time. They actually knew the laws of the Great Zhou so well. If this kind of thing happened to a citizen of the Great Zhou, it would be somewhat unclear. Furthermore, it was a foreigner. This case became somewhat difficult to judge. At this moment, Wei Peng looked calmly at the Xin nation diplomatic mission and asked, "Who said that my client was chasing after him?" "My client was just in a hurry. Your merchant was panicking and died from hitting the stairs. What does this have to do with my client?" When Wei Peng's words came out, whether it was the officials in the imperial court or the envoys from the various countries, they were all stunned. This reason was really amazing. Prince Shou was so shocked that his mouth opened wide. He said in surprise, "This kid is a talent." The Xin nation diplomatic mission quickly reacted and said coldly, "He was running while shouting 'Stop' and 'Don't run.' Could it be that he was also in a hurry?" Wei Peng said indifferently, "He was in a hurry and was thirsty. He happened to see a vendor carrying tea and wanted to ask for a cup of fermented rice wine to quench his thirst. Is that not allowed?" The Xin nation diplomatic mission glanced at him and said coldly, "You can quibble. As long as you let us search his soul, the truth will naturally be revealed." "Impudent." Another figure walked out from the crowd. Zhang Chun's face darkened as he said loudly, "Who do you think you are? A barbarian country. Are you worthy of searching the souls of my Great Zhou citizens?" After the various countries' envoys arrived in the Great Zhou, they realized that the Great Zhou had changed greatly in the past few years. Naturally, they did a detailed investigation of the Great Zhou court. They all knew the identity of the person who was reprimanding the Xin nation diplomatic mission. Zhang Chun was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel and the minister of Imperial Ancestral Temple. He was loyal to the Empress of the Great Zhou and did not belong to either the old or the new party. At the same time, he was also the most loyal dog under the powerful minister Li Mu. The Xin nation diplomatic mission's face was extremely cold. He gritted his teeth and said, "The citizens of the Xin nation died in the Great Zhou Shindu." Is this the attitude of the Great Zhou? After a short silence, a majestic voice finally came from behind the curtain at the front of the hall. The people of the Xin nation stole first and accidentally fell to their deaths while escaping. They brought this upon themselves and cannot blame others. There is no need to discuss this further. The Empress's voice echoed in the hall. In the end, she only left 2 words, "Court dismissed." The Empress's words undoubtedly determined the nature of this case. After the court was dismissed, the officials of the Great Zhou walked out of the crepe myrtle hall and couldn't help but straighten their backs. Although the Great Zhou had been the most powerful country on the Zhou continent for the past 100 years, it had been a long time since they had straightened their backs in front of the envoys of these small countries. At this moment, there was only one thought in the minds of the many officials. The Empress was mighty. The envoys of the various countries walked out behind the Great Zhou officials with different expressions on their faces. It had also been a long time since they had seen such a powerful Great Zhou. The Empress of the Great Zhou did not give any face to the Xin nation. She did not even search the soul of the Great Zhou citizen and directly ended the case. She was not afraid of the threats of the Xin nation diplomatic mission and did not give them a chance. They had once thought that the Great Zhou's national fortune had declined and would not last long after a woman ascended to the throne, reversing yin and yang and reversing the universe. No one had expected the Empress of the Great Zhou to be so powerful. They once again felt the aura of the ruler of the Zhou continent from her. The Xin nation diplomatic mission left without a word. It was not until this moment that they realized that the Great Zhou of today was no longer the Great Zhou of 5 years ago. The man from the Yong kingdom breathed a sigh of relief and said, 5 years ago the people of the Great Zhou were cold and heartless. They did not help the elderly on the road and they did not stand up for injustice. I once saw with my own eyes that the people of the Xin nation dragged a woman from the Great Zhou into a dark alley. The onlookers ignored them. I did not expect that 5 years later, a frail scholar would have the courage to step forward. The times have truly changed. The seriously ill lion of the Great Zhou has once again stood up. The young man beside him took a deep breath. The dignified voice of the Empress of the Great Zhou still echoed in his ears. He raised his head and resolutely said, There will be a day when I will also become that kind of person. After the envoys of the various countries returned to the Chamberlain of Dependencies, they closed their doors and did not leave. This trip to the Great Zhou was full of surprises. They needed to plan carefully. Li Mu did not go to the Chang'e Palace. Instead, he walked out of the Imperial Palace with the other officials. Outside the Imperial Palace, there were already many commoners waiting to see what was going on. They did not dare to approach the other officials. When they saw Li Mu come out, they immediately surrounded him, all of them talking at once. Official Li, how was it? How did Her Imperial Majesty decide? Will that righteous man pay with his life? Li Mu looked at their earnest gazes and smiled. It's been so long. You all still don't understand Her Imperial Majesty's temperament. How could she allow us, the people of the Great Zhou, to be bullied by outsiders on our doorstep? Her Imperial Majesty has already said that the people of the Xin nation apologized first. They only have themselves to blame and deserve to die. It has nothing to do with others. That righteous and courageous young man has already been acquitted and will leave the Imperial Palace in a moment. The commoners around him all cheered and jumped for joy when they heard this. That's great. Her Imperial Majesty is mighty. There were also some commoners who thought further and asked Li Mu worriedly, officially, if the people of the Xin nation use this as an excuse to stop paying tribute to the Great Zhou, what should we do? Li Mu said calmly, they can choose to pay tribute or not. If they don't pay tribute, would our Great Zhou not be the largest country in the Zhou continent? Great Zhou has vast lands and abundant resources. Do we lack their tributes? The commoners were stunned for a moment. After thinking about it, they quickly came to their senses. Official Li is right. Our Great Zhou has vast lands and abundant resources. Do we need their tributes? They can ride on our heads and ride roughshod over us. We don't need such tributes. If we take their tributes, we have to be bullied by them. We don't need their tributes. They can pay whoever they want. In order to record him well in the history books and to prevent the other countries from breaking away from the Great Zhou, the former emperor tolerated the other countries. God knows how much the people of Xindu suffered and how much suffering they suffered. When the merchants of other countries bullied the people of Xindu, the commoners dared not speak up. When the people of Xin raped women, the former emperor, who was muddle-headed, actually executed the righteous people who saw injustice. Great Zhou was a great country. As the people of Great Zhou, they could have been proud and arrogant. However, under the former emperor's muddle-headed policies, the commoners of Xindu were inferior to the people of other countries. The commoners had long had enough of this. Li Mu originally wanted to keep the tributes from the other countries. After all, it was the symbol of Great Zhou as the most powerful country in the Celestial Empire. After this incident, he had changed his mind. It was better not to ask for tributes. Everyone in the court knew that Lord Li and the Empress wore the same pants. It was not excessive to respect him as much as the Empress. Moreover, in his lifetime he still wanted to rely on Li Mu to get promoted and move to a bigger residence. At the palace gates, the commoners had already dispersed. Li Mu's words were still echoing in their minds. The news spread from 1 to 10, and from 10 to 100. It wouldn't be long before everyone in the fairy's capital knew what he had said. Not long after, in a restaurant. It was lunchtime. The restaurant's business was good, and there were no empty seats. At some point, a few dark-skinned men wearing strange clothes walked into the restaurant. They glanced at the customers who were eating in the restaurant. One of them walked up to the counter and said to the manager in bad Great Zhou language, "We are from the Xin dynasty. Ask the rest of the people here to go out and arrange a good private room. We will serve all the dishes you have here." The manager of the restaurant had just heard Lord Li's words at the palace gates. He was overwhelmed with excitement. He glanced at the men and said coldly, "I've only heard of the Great Zhou. I've never heard of the Xin dynasty. Which barbarian country are you from? There is a seat in the corner over there. If you can sit, then sit. If you can't, then leave. Don't disturb our business here." The Xin dynasty merchant was used to running amok in the Great Zhou. This time he brought his friends with him. He did not expect the lowly commoners of the Great Zhou to be so impudent to him. His face instantly darkened. He said sternly, "How dare you? Do you know who you are talking to? Bah! You want to stir up trouble?" The manager slammed the abacus on the table and sneered, "Fellows, report this to the authorities." Inside the Chamberlain of Dependencies. In the courtyard where the young envoy resided, a middle-aged man stood on the roof, overlooking the entire divine capital. A strange light flashed in his eyes. The divine capital of the great Zhou, which was surging with psychokinesis, shone with a golden light in his eyes. Chapter 431. The ambassadors of the various countries had come with a premeditated plan. They wanted to sever their relationship with the Great Zhou to further attack the people of the Great Zhou. It had been a tradition for the countries of the Zhou continent to pay tribute to the Great Zhou for more than a century. If the various countries declared independence, the Great Zhou would only exist in name as the strongest country on the Zhou continent. This would cause the people of the Great Zhou to continue to lose their support. If the people's support was lost, it would be difficult to gather the emperor's qi, and the royal family would be unable to produce new experts. It wouldn't be long before the Great Zhou went from decline to decline. This was something that the various countries were happy to see. However, when they walked out of the Honglu temple, they found that there were only a few figures on the streets that had been abnormally crowded yesterday. After some investigation, they found that the people of the divine capital had spontaneously gone to the ancestral temple to pay tribute. Because the people were paying tribute, the streets were empty. How united was the people of the divine capital? Under these circumstances, even if they stopped paying tribute, the impact on the people's support would be minimal. Even if they stopped paying tribute, it would instead cause the people of the Great Zhou to be more united. In the following half a day, the Ministry of Justice arrested dozens of foreign merchants who had violated the laws of the Great Zhou. They were flogged at the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, attracting countless people to watch. Their cheers could be heard from several streets away. There were also a few who had seriously violated the law and were likely to face several years of imprisonment. The ambassadors of the various countries protested this matter to the Great Zhou court, requesting that the Ministry of Justice release the relevant people, but they were rejected. One of the ambassadors of the Shin nation asked around and returned to the Honglu temple. He said to his companion, "I've asked around." When the memorial was delivered to the Great Zhou Secretariat, it was shot down. It was done by that Li Mu. This person is unmoved by force or persuasion. He's not afraid of anything, another ambassador of the Shin nation thought for a moment, then said, "There's no other way. Let's just directly protest to the Empress of the Great Zhou. I don't believe that she's not afraid of us cutting off our tribute to the Great Zhou. If that happens, she'll become a sinner for all eternity." In the Jianghu palace, Li Mu handed a memorial to the Empress who was reading a book and asked, "Your Majesty, the Shin nation's envoy threatened the imperial court. If we don't release them, they will cut off their tribute to the Great Zhou. How should I respond to them?" Zhou Yi flipped to a page and said indifferently, "Write a decree. From today onwards, the Great Zhou and the Shin nation will sever their tributes. Didn't they refuse to pay tribute? In the future they won't have to pay tribute anymore." Li Mu nodded and said, "As you wish." Not long after, Mr. Mei walked into the Honglu temple. His voice resounded in all directions. "Envoy of Shin country, receive the imperial edict." Two figures walked out of a courtyard and stood quietly in front of Mr. Mei. They sneered in their hearts. As expected, it was better to hand the memorial directly to the Empress of the Great Zhou. There was a result so quickly. That Li Mu didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, but how could the Empress of the Great Zhou not know the importance of the big picture? Mr. Mei looked at them indifferently and said, "Her Majesty has decreed that the Shin nation's merchants are of inferior character and have violated many laws within the Great Zhou." The Shin nation's envoy did not restrain his people and instead made unreasonable demands of the Great Zhou court. From today onwards, the Great Zhou and the Shin nation will sever their tributes. Mr. Mei had already finished speaking, but the Shin nation's envoy was still frozen in place. Their most important mission this time was to sever their tributes to the Great Zhou. Now that they had achieved their goal, they didn't feel any sense of accomplishment. 5 years ago, the Great Zhou Emperor gave them too many benefits and begged them to continue their tributes. 5 years later, the Empress of the Great Zhou took the initiative to sever the relationship between the two nations. After Mr. Mei finished reading the imperial edict, he floated away, leaving the envoys in the Honglu temple looking at each other. Although the imperial edict only mentioned the Shin nation, it also sent a message to all of them. The Empress of the Great Zhou didn't care about the tributes of the other nations. If they used this as a threat, they would probably end up like the Shin nation. From now on, everyone here would have to reconsider their relationship with the Great Zhou. Jianghu Palace. After learning that the Shin nation envoy had left the Honglu temple in anger, Li Mu's mouth twitched in disdain. The Empress wasn't so easily threatened. She had always been amenable to coaxing and not coercion. The Xin nation people had clearly miscalculated if they wanted to use the method of threatening the previous emperor to threaten her. She didn't even want to be the empress of the Great Zhou, much less the overlord of Zhou province. If the other nations wanted to pay tributes, they could play by themselves. To the empress, growing grass and flowers, playing aeroplane chess with Xiao Bai and Wan Wan, and painting with Li Mu were perhaps more attractive than these things. She didn't care about whether or not the other nations paid tributes. She even gave Li Mu full authority to receive the envoys. Regardless of the other nation's ulterior motives, the Great Zhou had to have the bearing of a great nation. Although there was no need to give them special privileges over the people of the Great Zhou, she still had to do her part as a host. According to the rules of previous years, after the imperial court banquet, the envoys would be taken on a tour of Xin, due to show off the glory of the great nation. During the month of tributes, the people of Xin, Du would wash the streets and paint the houses. This had already become a tradition. They strove to show the best of the Great Zhou in front of these small nations. In previous years, officials from the Ministry of Rites were in charge of this. Li Mu had never presided over this before. He specially came to the Ministry of Rites to consult the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites. How was this arranged in previous years? The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites said, Lord Li, in the past, one of the 6 ministries and 9 temples would be chosen as the place for the envoys to visit. After the selection, they would be notified at least a day in advance so that the officials could make preparations. After he finished speaking, he asked again, Lord Li, which government office will we choose this time? Li Mu waved his hand and said, whatever. The next day at the entrance of the Department of Offerings, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites looked at the envoys and said, this is the Department of Offerings of the Great Zhou. Everyone please. The envoys all had expressions of interest on their faces. In the past, the Great Zhou court would only allow them to visit the 6 ministries and 9 temples. This was the first time they were allowed to visit the Department of Offerings. The Department of Offerings was the place where the experts of a nation gathered. From the Department of Offerings, one could see the foundation and strength of a nation. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites led the crowd in slowly. They passed through the front yard of the Department of Offerings and came to an extremely wide open space. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites took the initiative to introduce, this is the place where the offerings practice their martial arts. On the open space, ripples of mana could be felt. At the very front, on a small slope, stood a human-shaped target. One of the worshippers who exuded the aura of the 5th tier waved his hand, and a dozen or so talismans flew out from his sleeves, creating a violent wave of spiritual energy that knocked down the human-shaped target and also raised the slope to the ground. This scene made the envoys' throats dry up. Every single one of those Fulu was above the earth rank. These Fulu talismans were hard to come by in their countries. Anyone who owned one would have to keep it as a life-saving trump card. She picked up the book again and waved her hand. Forget it, I don't care anymore. You decide. Li Mu said, then I will accept their tributes on behalf of your majesty. Although the tributes from the other countries didn't make much of a difference to the national treasury, it made a big difference to the people of the Great Zhou, who didn't want their motherland to be strong. Accepting tributes from the other countries could strengthen the cohesion of the people, increase the happiness of the people, and increase their psychokinesis and speed up the condensation of imperial qi. If the Empress wanted to retire from her position as Empress soon and spend her old age with Li Mu, it was best not to be willful. Li Mu had just finished drafting the edict when Mr. Mei walked in and said, Your Majesty, an envoy from the Yong Kingdom is outside the palace, requesting an audience. Zhou Yi put down her book and sat up from her dragon throne. What is the Yong Kingdom doing here? She asked. Mr. Mei shook his head. I don't know. Does your Majesty wish to see them? Zhou Yi thought for a moment, then said, Have them wait outside the imperial study. The Chang'e Palace was her sleeping quarters. She generally didn't receive foreign officials here. Zhou Yi stood up, glanced at Li Mu and said, Come with us. Among the 6 countries, the Yong Kingdom wasn't the strongest, but it had the most prospects. The 4 countries of Liang, Yu, Jiang, and Jing relied on the support of the 4 Taoist sections. Without the 4 Taoist sects, the Yong Kingdom would immediately be reduced to a low-tier country. The Xin Kingdom was the birthplace of Buddhism. It wasn't small and had a large population. However, there were too many internal problems and the quality of the people was generally low. The Great Zhou had once thought the Shin kingdom to be very powerful, but after fighting it once, they discovered that the Shin kingdom was only strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Only the Yong kingdom's strength was truly powerful. Disregarding everything else, a country with less than a tenth of the Great Zhou's population had condensed 3 strands of Emperor's Qi within 50 years, creating 3 transcending mortality experts for the Yong kingdom. The Great Zhou had 10 times the population of the Yong kingdom and was known as the strongest country on the Zhou continent. Yet, in the same amount of time, it had barely managed to condense 1 strand of Emperor's Qi. Just based on this, the Great Zhou's previous emperor and the previous emperor would be ashamed even if they were lying in their coffins. It wasn't hard to guess how condensed the Yong kingdom's people's Qi was. A single country had produced 5 generations of wise emperors. If he hadn't transmigrated, it wasn't impossible for the Yong kingdom to defeat the Great Zhou and unify the Zhou continent several decades later. The Imperial Study. This was the place where the Empress received foreign officials outside of the morning court session. The layout was very similar to the Ziwei Palace. The Empress stood behind a curtain while Li Mu stood in the middle of the hall. Before long, Mr. Mei led 2 people into the study. One was a middle-aged man, and the other was a young man. They were the envoys sent by the Yong kingdom. The middle-aged man cupped his hands and bowed to the Empress saying, "Greetings, Your Imperial Majesty, the Empress of the Great Zhou." The Empress asked from behind the curtain, "Envoys from the Yong kingdom, what business do you have with us?" The middle-aged man replied, "Before this subject came to the Great Zhou, I was ordered by the Emperor to request a mutual waiver of tariffs between the Great Zhou and the Yong kingdom in order to promote friendly trade between the 2 countries. The Empress's voice quickly reached Li Mu's ears. "What do you think?" Mutual waiver of tariffs between the 2 countries had both advantages and disadvantages. If they retained their advantages and curbed their disadvantages, it would be a good thing for the people of both countries. The Yong kingdom's monarch clearly had foresight that others didn't possess. Li Mu stepped forward and said, "This matter still needs to be discussed in detail. I will give you an answer in a few days." The middle-aged man cupped his hands and said, "This is a matter that will benefit the people of both countries. I hope Your Imperial Majesty will be able to judge this matter clearly. We will quietly await the good news." Not long after, the 2 men withdrew from the Imperial study. The Empress walked out from behind the curtain and said, "This matter?" Li Mu replied, "Leave this matter to this subject." The Empress looked at Li Mu with satisfaction before finding Xiao Bai Wanwan and the others to play mahjong. Li Mu remained in the Imperial study, pondering over the matter that the Yong kingdom's envoy had just spoken of. At the very least, the removal of trade barriers between the 2 countries was beneficial to the common people. They could use cheaper prices to purchase goods from the other country. However, if they didn't control it well, it would be a devastating blow to the merchants of their own country. Which goods should have their tariffs reduced? Which goods should have their tariffs reduced? How to reduce them? How to reduce them? How to reduce them? Li Mu first went to the Ministry of Revenue. After spending a few days doing his homework, he already had some ideas. He arrived at the Chamberlain of Dependencies and knocked on a courtyard door. The one who opened the door was the young man from the Yong kingdom's envoy. When he saw Li Mu, his expression froze, appearing somewhat flustered. Li Mu strolled into the courtyard. Glancing around, he saw an easel propped up in the courtyard. On the canvas, a painting was nearly completed. The middle-aged man smiled and said, "Since you have already made your decision, there is no need to ask me." Recalling Li Mu's reminder, the young man sighed with emotion and said, "No wonder Great Zhou has risen again so quickly. The Empress of Great Zhou looks down on the other countries, possessing the spirit of a celestial empire. The officials she has placed in important positions also have such insight. They are intelligent and not lacking in ingenuity. Most importantly, they have the hearts of the common people, establishing their hearts for the heavens and earth, and establishing their lives for the common people. A real man born between the heavens and earth should be like this. It is a pity that he was not born in my great Yong." The middle-aged man also sighed and said, "The Empress of Great Zhou has exceptional insight. If the previous Emperor of Great Zhou had been at death's door for another 10 years, or if the Great Zhou family had not seized the imperial aura and seized power, then today's Great Zhou would not be like this. Everything is predestined. Li Mu walked out of the Chamberlain of Dependencies and leisurely strolled through the streets. The streets were bustling with activity. Li Mu patiently responded to the greetings of the common people along the way. Along the way he bought 3 sticks of Tonghulu. Thinking of Wanwan, he hesitated for a moment before buying 3 more sticks. Afterwards he continued to walk forward. This time, after walking for a short while, he heard a voice behind him. "Official Li, please wait." Li Mu turned his head to look at the young man and asked, "Is there anything else?" The young man handed a letter to Li Mu and said, "I request Official Li to deliver this to Her Imperial Majesty, the Empress." Li Mu accepted the letter and nodded his head. It just so happens that this official needs to make a trip to the palace. The young envoy cupped his hands in gratitude and said, "Thank you for your advice, Official Li." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "It is all for the common people." They also initiated a nationwide boycott of the merchants of the Great Zhou and the goods of the Great Zhou. There were also some people of the Xin Kingdom who declared that the power of the Xin Kingdom had long surpassed that of the Great Zhou. They said that they would soon go to war with the Great Zhou, and that the declining Great Zhou would be unable to resist the brave soldiers of the Xin Kingdom. In less than a month they would be able to fight their way to the Great Zhou's divine capital. The Xin Kingdom's imperial court didn't respond to this. The Xin Kingdom was already in chaos, but in the Great Zhou, there wasn't the slightest ripple. When the news reached the Great Zhou, all the court officials didn't even have the mood to discuss it. Li residence. With the formation closed, Li Mu held a brush in his hand and drew a door on the wall. He easily pushed the door open and walked out. Soon after, he closed the door and the wall returned to its original state. Li Mu then activated the formation and stood outside the formation. Using the brush, a gap quickly appeared in the protective formation of the Li residence. It was as if Li Mu had opened a hole, allowing him to easily walk into the formation. After several days of trial and error, Li Mu had figured out other uses of the Tao of painting. Aside from being used to draw talismans, the Tao of painting could also be used to break through formations and pass through walls. It was practically unstoppable. No matter how sturdy a wall was, a door could be opened. Opening a hole in an ordinary formation was even easier. The Tao of painting wasn't the strongest offensive ability, but it was superior in its strangeness. Opening a hole in a formation was something that no other Tao could accomplish. Once Li Mu's attainments in the Tao of painting caught up to that youth from the Yong Kingdom or the Empress, he would be able to use this Tao to do even more things. In the past few days, Li Mu's life had been fulfilling and meaningful. At the same time he cultivated 4 Taos: Tao, Buddhism, Yao and painting. Every day, aside from dealing with memorials and daily cultivation, he also had to temper his body with Shangguanli in the astral winds of the 9 heavens. He also had to learn painting from the Empress. He didn't even have much time to accompany Wanwan and Xiaobai. During dinner today, Li Mu noticed that Wanwan ate 1 bowl less than usual. It wasn't just dinner. It seemed that her appetite hadn't been very good these past few days. Yesterday she even ate less candied haws. He had been busy cultivating these past few days and had neglected her. Before going to bed at night, Li Mu looked at Wanwan, who seemed to have something on her mind, and asked softly, "What's wrong? Did someone make you angry?" Wanwan shook her head and whispered, "No, it's just that I miss." Two of them were in the creation realm while the other 3 were in the transcendent realm. This kind of strength was naturally not worth mentioning in the 6 sects or the Department of Offerings. However, in a small county city they could be considered a powerful force. It should be known that in the Zhejiang County Yamen, there were only 2 in the creation realm and 1 in the transcendent realm. Their lips moved slightly but no sound came out. It was as if they were communicating through dermic powers. Li Mu had no interest in eavesdropping, but these people had a strong murderous aura. When they communicated through dermic powers, the smiles on their faces were too vulgar. It was obvious that they were not plotting anything good. It was very easy to attract Li Mu's attention. In order to make sure that they were not planning something that would harm the people, Li Mu closed his eyes and moved his ears slightly. It was a type of demonic technique that originated from the Bat clan's innate divine power. It could easily eavesdrop on their dermic powers. Hee, those people from the Yamen are really stupid. They believed us so easily, it's a pity that they are too useless. They can't even deal with a five-tailed fox demon. In the end they had to ask others for help and almost ruined our plans. It would be such a pity if the target that we've been eyeing for so long was obtained by others. That fox demon is not easy to deal with. If those people hadn't injured her, we wouldn't have had a chance until now. Hurry up and eat. Once we're done, we'll act immediately. That fox demon should still be recuperating. We can't delay any longer. If the Great Zhou Court sends a true expert, our efforts over the past few months will have been in vain. A five-tailed fox demon will definitely sell for a high price. Big brother, after we capture her, can you let me have some fun first? I haven't had a taste of a five-tailed fox demon yet. Bulsh *T, a fox demon that hasn't been touched by anyone is only valuable. Take care of that damn thing of yours. Li Mu opened his eyes, picked up his teacup and took a light sip. It was such a coincidence that he would meet the instigators of the fox demon incident at a random restaurant. The cause of the incident was that these 5 people had their eyes on the fox demon. However, they were no match for the fox demon, so they came up with this plan of borrowing the power of the local government to weaken the fox demon first. Then, they would be able to take advantage of the situation behind the scenes. It was a wishful thinking. The Great Zhou was a human government. Generally speaking, the people of the Great Zhou referred to the humans who lived in the Great Zhou. For the imperial court, if demons harmed people, the government had to kill them. However, killing demons by humans was not something the government should be concerned with. These 5 heretical cultivation practitioners had used this reason to make use of the Zhejiang County government. Their goal had been that fox demon from the very beginning. There were evil demons who ate the essence, blood, and souls of humans. There were also evil humans who killed demons for their course. There was also a group of cultivators who did not walk the righteous path. Because they were afraid of the imperial court, they did not dare to attack the common people. Therefore they targeted demons. Killing people was against the law, but killing demons did not count. Even if the Great Zhou Court found out, they would not do anything to them. In Li Mu's eyes, these people were no different from those evil demons. When he was halfway through his meal, the 5 people had already left their table and strode out of the restaurant. Li Mu left a silver ingot and walked out slowly. Not long after, outside the Zhejiang County, a thin man closed his eyes and sensed. He pointed in a direction and said, "The blood curse's reaction is over there. Let's go." As he finished speaking, several figures shot up into the sky and flew forward. At a certain moment, the thin man suddenly stopped and looked back. The other 4 people also stopped and asked, "Big brother, what's wrong?" The middle-aged man looked back and said, "I keep feeling that someone is following us." The other 4 people immediately became alert. They looked around but found nothing. One of them was puzzled and said, "There's nothing. Big brother, are you mistaken?" Another person said, "Even if someone is following us, it's impossible for there not to be any fluctuations of mana. Big brother, are you being too sensitive?" The thin man looked around and said, "Maybe I'm thinking too much. Let's go." The 5 people continued forward and quickly disappeared. But after the time it took to drink a cup of tea, they appeared out of thin air. The man who disappeared looked around again and sighed in relief. He said, "Looks like there really isn't anything." One of them smiled and said, "I already said Big Brother is being too sensitive. Let's go quickly. If that fox demon escapes, it will be difficult to find." The 5 people flew away again. On the ground, an invisible figure followed behind them at a leisurely pace. The invisibility spells of Taoism were of little value and could only be used on mortals. In front of cultivators of the same level, they would definitely be exposed. Although invisibility spells could prevent any fluctuations of mana, he could only rely on the strength of his legs. If he used spells to fly or ride on clouds, he would be easily discovered. Fortunately, Li Mu cultivated to Taoism. His body was far stronger than normal cultivators. Even if he only relied on the strength of his legs, he would not lose sight of him for a while. After only 15 minutes, he sensed a strong fluctuation of mana in front of him. The man pointed at Huanji and said to the small demon, "Little snake, that's Lord Huanji of Meizong. Are you willing to join Meizong and follow Lord Huanji?" The small demon hesitated for a moment and asked softly, "Is there any benefit in joining Meizong?" The man smiled and said, there are many benefits. In the Meizong sect, you can obtain spiritual jades for cultivation and also receive guidance from experts. Lord Illusion Princess's father, Lord Illusion Heaven Lord, is a 7th level Shen demon. If you can receive his guidance, maybe you will have the chance to become a great demon in the future. When the small demon heard this, his eyes lit up. He immediately nodded and said, then I'm willing. The man patted him on the shoulder and said, then let's go. After keeping the small demon, the group flew into the air again. The handsome demon did not have enough spiritual power and was carried by the others. They flew all the way to the demon country in the depths of the 100,000 mountains. The man beside the small demon looked at him and asked, little snake, what other relatives do you have in your family? Aren't you going to tell them? After a while, the small demon was already familiar with them. He said, my parents were killed by human cultivators long ago. I've always been alone. I don't have any relatives. In the group, another person gritted his teeth and said, damn humans. How many demons have died in their hands? They write about demons eating humans all day long. Why don't they write about humans killing demons? Demons killing humans is intolerable. Humans killing demons is enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens? The small demon said, not all books are written like that. There's a book called Strange Stories from a Chinese studio. It's written quite well. There are evil people in it, but there are also demons who are affectionate and righteous. The man said, I know about this book. Lord Huanji likes to read it. She even asked us to find Pu Songling and pay him a visit. Unfortunately, we haven't found him. He shook his head and said, there aren't many people like Mr. Pu who are sensible. Most of the humans keep saying that the monsters are evil, but what have they done? Killing the monsters, taking their souls, stealing our monster cores, capturing the female monsters of the fox race and the snake race, sealing their cultivation base and providing them with entertainment. It's not just female demons. Many handsome male demons were also captured by them to satisfy the different desires of humans. Little snake, you're just lucky. With your looks, if those humans saw you, they would definitely capture you and make you do that kind of thing with them. The small demon was stunned. Then he said embarrassedly, there's such a good thing? The man patted his shoulder and said, you're thinking too much. If you're lucky, they'll make you accompany those old women. If you sleep with them for one night, you'll have nightmares for 10 days. If you're unlucky, they'll make you accompany men. Ah, do you still think that's a good thing? The small demon was so scared that his face turned pale. He said, too scary, too scary. The man beside him smiled and said, don't worry. Now that you're with Lord Huanji, no one can bully you. Cultivate well in the future. Only when you're strong can you control your fate as a demon. The small demon's face became serious. He said, I know. Thank you, big brother. You will receive countless benefits and even have the chance to comprehend the heavenly book. Although that heavenly book belongs to the Fox clan, other clans can also benefit from it. Li Mu shook his head and said, forget it. Even such a strong person is not his match. Wouldn't I be courting death if I go? Hu Jiao slapped his head and said angrily, you are a snake demon. How can you be more cowardly than a rat demon? You are a disgrace to the snake clan. Li Mu laughed and said, there is nothing wrong with being careful. Only by being careful can we live longer. Hu Jiao nodded and said, that's right. That Li Mu is not only strong but also very handsome. Even a strong person like the Empress of the Great Zhou is infatuated with him. It is said that he often goes in and out of the palace and sleeps in the Empress' bedroom. Li Mu said in surprise, you know this too? Hu Jiao smiled and said, the spies of the Meizong sect are all over the world. You will know in the future. Li Mu's eyes shone with admiration and said, the Meizong sect is too powerful. Hu Jiao breathed a sigh of relief and said, that Li Mu is the powerful one. He did what Cui Ming couldn't do in 20 years in 2 years. It is said that in the imperial court, he is in charge of the imperial court alone. If we pull Li Mu into the Meizong sect, every move of the Zhou kingdom will be under our control. We can even control the Great Zhou through this person. Li Mu laughed dryly and said, good plan. Hu Jiao continued, however, that Li Mu is a very upright person. I'm afraid it won't be easy to win him over. However, we can take advantage of his lecherous characteristics and think of a way to let the women of the Meizong sect seduce him. Li Mu was stunned for a moment and said, "Lecherous." Hu Jiu nodded and said, "According to our spies in Luoyang, every time Li Mu goes out, there must be beauties by his side. His wife is an outstanding beauty, and the 2 concubines by his side are also first-class beauties. One of them is the most beautiful woman in our fox tribe. Not to mention there is also the Empress of the Great Zhou. Rumor has it that this person will have 10 women every night and won't get up until late in the morning." Li Mu said angrily, "Slander, this is pure slander." Hu Jiu looked at him strangely and asked, "Why are you so agitated?" Li Mu said angrily, "Which spy provided this false information? If Li Mu really followed the Empress of the Great Zhou, how could the Empress allow him to have an affair with other women? This information is obviously false. That spy is too irresponsible. If he acted rashly based on this false information, wouldn't he be letting our sisters of the Meizong sect walk into a trap?" After thinking deeply, Hu Jiu said, "What you said makes sense. That Li Mu seducing the Empress of the Great Zhou may be false, but it must be true that he is easily fascinated by women. Is it possible to win him over through the woman beside him? That you're tuning in to the Phantom Sword Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.